I found the GoPro half buried in red sand at the mouth of Orderville Canyon, its case cracked down the middle, but the SD card miraculously intact. The timestamp on the last file read 6:47 p.m., exactly 31 hours before I knelt in that burning Utah heat and pressed play. What I saw in those 40 seconds of footage would haunt me for the rest of my life, would make me question everything I thought I understood about the natural world, would prove that some legends survive because the things they describe never stopped hunting. My name is Derek Hayes, and I have been a ranger at Zion National Park for 8 months. Before that, I worked wildfire suppression in Colorado, part of a hotshot crew that spent summers chasing flames across mountainsides, cutting containment lines, saving homes and forests and lives. I was good at it. My crew was better. Aaron Kessler had 15 years of experience and hands so steady he could fell a burning pine within 6 inches of his target every single time. Cole Bannister was the youngest of us, 23 and fearless, always first into the danger zone and last to retreat. Wyatt Granger was our medic, calm in every crisis, the kind of man who could tourniquet a severed artery while cracking jokes to keep the victim conscious. They were my brothers in every way that mattered, and I watched them die while I ran. The Cascade Fire of 2 years ago changed everything. We were cutting line on the North Ridge when the wind shifted without warning, turning a manageable situation into a death trap in under 90 seconds. The flames jumped our containment and raced uphill toward us with the sound of a freight train, that terrible roaring that still echoes through my nightmares every third night like clockwork. I remember Aaron screaming into the radio that we needed air support, that the fire had boxed us in, that there was no way out. I remember Cole trying to deploy his fire shelter and the wind ripping it from his hands, sending it cartwheeling into the inferno. I remember Wyatt looking at me with something I have never been able to name. Not quite forgiveness, not quite accusation, just recognition that we were both about to die, and there was nothing either of us could do about it. But I did not die. I found a crack in the rocks, a narrow chimney that dropped 20 feet to a dry stream bed below the fire line. I shouted for the others to follow, but they could not hear me over the roar. Or maybe they heard and could not reach me, or maybe I did not shout loud enough. The truth is, I do not know. My memories of those final moments are fractured, unreliable, corrupted by trauma and guilt, and the desperate rationalization of a man who survived when better men burned. I dropped into that chimney and crawled through darkness while my crew died above me. I emerged on the far side of the ridge with scorched lungs and blistered skin, and the sound of their screaming still echoing in my ears. The official report called it a tragic accident, said I had done everything right, said survivor guilt was natural and expected and treatable with proper therapy. The unofficial report, the one written on the faces of every firefighter who knew the truth, said I had abandoned my brothers, said I had saved myself while they burned, said I would have to live with that choice for however many years I had left. The nightmares started 3 days after the funeral. Always the same structure, always the same progression. I am on the ridge with my crew when the wind shifts. The fire comes alive, becomes almost sentient, moves with purpose toward us. Aaron shouts into the radio. Cole loses his shelter. Wyatt looks at me with those eyes. And then I run. Every time, in every dream, I run while they burn. I wake up screaming or crying, or just lying there in the dark with my heart trying to punch through my rib cage, and for a few terrible seconds, I cannot remember if it was real or not. My therapist in Denver suggested a change of scenery, said that confronting my fear of wilderness in a controlled environment might help rewire my trauma responses, said that working in a national park would let me reconnect with nature without the immediate danger of active firefighting. I laughed when she said it, bitter and sharp, but I took the Zion posting anyway because running away to Utah felt more honest than pretending therapy would fix what was fundamentally broken inside me. Zion National Park is one of the most beautiful places on Earth, and also one of the most dangerous. The sandstone canyons drop thousands of feet from rim to river, carved over millions of years by water that still floods through the Narrows with deadly force after summer thunderstorms. The slot canyons are so narrow in places that a grown man cannot turn around, can only press forward or back through passages that might be completely submerged within minutes if the weather turns. Every year, tourists die here. They underestimate the heat, the distance, the time. They ignore warning signs and push beyond marked trails and discover too late that the wilderness does not care about their intentions. But the official dangers, the flash floods and heat stroke, and falls and dehydration, those I understood. Those I could prepare for, warn visitors about, respond to with training and equipment and proper protocols. What I found in Orderville Canyon fell outside every category I had ever been taught to recognize. What I found proved that some dangers cannot be managed, only survived. The GoPro belonged to Jordan Blake, a seasonal naturalist who had been working at Zion for 3 summers. 24 years old, enthusiastic about desert ecology to the point of annoying the permanent staff with facts about cryptobiotic soil crusts and the breeding habits of California condors. Jordan had signed out for a solo day hike to Orderville Canyon the morning before I found the camera. Permit valid until 7 p.m., expected back at the visitor center by nightfall. When Jordan did not return, I volunteered for the search before anyone asked. Something about the young naturalist reminded me of Cole Bannister. Same determined optimism, same assumption that the world was fundamentally safe if you just followed the rules and respected the terrain. My crew had believed that too, right up until the moment the fire proved them wrong. I knelt in sand that radiated heat even at 7:30 in the morning, the GoPro growing slick in my palm as sweat mixed with the fine red dust that covers everything in the Narrows. The screen was cracked but functional, and when I pressed play, my hand started shaking before the 10-second mark. Jordan's face filled the frame, eyes wide, voice barely above a whisper. "Derek, if you find this, do not come looking for me. There is something wrong in Orderville. The tracks I have been following, they change. Coyote prints becoming human, human becoming something else. I know how that sounds. I know. But I saw it. Saw something wearing a cougar's body stand up on 2 legs and speak with my mother's voice. It knew things, Derek. Private things Mom said to me before she died. Things I never told anyone." The camera jerked sideways, capturing a flash of canyon wall, of sky, of Jordan running with ragged breathing echoing off the sandstone. Then the footage stabilized for one terrible moment, and I saw what Jordan had seen. Something running on 4 legs that briefly stood on 2. Something with a coyote's body and human hands, fingers articulated in ways that made my stomach clench. Something that turned toward the lens with Jordan's own face looking back from a wolf's skull. Eye sockets filled with Jordan's exact brown irises, jaw working in patterns that mimicked speech but produced no sound. Then the recording cut to black, file corrupted or deliberately ended, and I was left kneeling in the sand with a dead camera and a choice to make. My radio crackled from my belt. "Hayes, this is Base. You at the Orderville Junction yet?" I keyed the transmit button with fingers that would not stop trembling. "Affirmative. Found Blake's GoPro. Last footage is disturbing. Requesting additional search and rescue personnel." A pause on the other end. "Copy that. What kind of disturbing?" I thought about describing what I had seen, about trying to explain a shape-shifting creature to dispatch, about the inevitable psychological evaluation that would follow. "Possible wildlife encounter," I said finally. Something spooked Blake badly. Proceeding into Orderville to continue search. "Negative, Hayes. Weather Service is calling for afternoon thunderstorms. Flash flood risk is elevated. Return to base." I looked at the canyon ahead, at the slot where Orderville Creek carved through Navajo sandstone, walls rising 1,000 feet on either side. The narrow section, one of the most dangerous hikes in the park. Flash flood potential, extreme heat, limited escape routes, and according to every geological survey and ranger report, completely safe from predators beyond the occasional rattlesnake. But Jordan Blake was in there somewhere, alone with something that wore animal bodies and spoke with dead women's voices, and I was still carrying 3 men in my head, still waking up screaming every 3rd night, still trying to outrun the choice I had made on that burning ridge 2 years ago. I am losing signal, I said into the radio, then switched it off before dispatch could respond. The Orderville Canyon entrance was a narrow cleft in red sandstone, the creek running clear and cold despite the brutal July heat. My pack held 3 liters of water, emergency bivvy, first aid kit, rope, headlamp, and my personal gear. Garmin InReach satellite communicator, smartphone with offline maps, backup battery pack. The GoPro went into a waterproof case on my chest rig. If I found something, I wanted evidence that could not be explained away. The canyon swallowed me within 50 feet. Temperature dropped 20 degrees in the shade, the walls so narrow in places that I had to turn sideways to squeeze through, my pack scraping sandstone that had been forming since before humans existed. The creek ran ankle-deep here, the current gentle, the sound of water echoing in strange harmonics off the curved walls that towered above me like the ribcage of some vast geological creature. At the half-mile mark, I found the first print. Human foot, bare, pressed into wet sand. Normal, unremarkable, probably Jordan's. Then 10 feet later, the same foot but elongated, toes stretched into something more like claws, the heel narrowed to a point. Then 10 feet beyond that, a coyote's paw print, except the dew claw was positioned like a human thumb, articulated with joints that could grasp and grip. I photographed each print with my phone, the camera struggling in the mixed light of deep shadow and reflected glare. My hands were steady now, the trembling replaced by a cold focus I recognized from the fire line. When the situation became bad enough, my body stopped panicking and started calculating. It was the aftermath that destroyed me, the quiet hours when my mind had time to process what had happened. In the moment, I could function. In the moment, I was still the man who had survived. A sound echoed from deeper in the canyon, a voice, human, calling my name. Derek, Derek, help me. Jordan's voice, but wrong. The cadence too perfect, the desperation too performed, like someone reading from a script about what fear should sound like. The fire had made sounds like that too, I remembered. A roar that was almost voice-like, almost intelligent, like something that understood exactly what it was consuming. I moved forward, one hand on the bench-made folding knife on my belt. Stupid, I knew. What would a knife do against something that could reshape its skeleton at will? But the weight was comforting, the familiar edge a reminder that I still existed in a world where tools meant something. The canyon widened into a pool, waist deep, the water so clear I could see my shadow on the sandy bottom 15 feet down. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the walls above, painting the sandstone in shades of amber and crimson that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. On the far side of the pool, Jordan Blake sat on a rock ledge. Hiking clothes soaked, hair plastered to skull, face turned toward me with an expression of profound relief. Derek, oh thank God. My ankle, I think it is broken. I have been stuck here since yesterday. Did you get my camera? Did you see the footage? I stopped 20 feet away, water swirling around my thighs, my pulse doing that thing it did when my body recognized danger before my conscious mind caught up. Jordan, I said carefully. Yes, who else would it be? A laugh, too loud, bouncing off canyon walls in overlapping waves. I am so glad you came. Everyone else would have turned back because of the flood warnings. Stand up, I said. I told you, my ankle is broken. I cannot. Stand up now. The thing wearing Jordan's face smiled, and the expression was almost right, but not quite. The muscles pulled in sequences that suggested someone learning to operate a face from the inside, like a puppet master still figuring out which strings controlled which features. It stood smoothly, no limp, no hesitation, and I saw that its feet were wrong. Human toes but too long, joints bending backward slightly, the ankle rotating in directions that human anatomy did not permit. You are not Jordan, I said. No, it agreed, and Jordan's voice fractured into harmonics, multiple tones speaking in unison like a choir of the damned. But I wore Jordan for a while, warm body, tasted like sunscreen and fear, fought longer than most. Kept screaming about how this was not scientifically possible. The thing laughed with Jordan's mouth, a terrible sound that echoed and multiplied until the whole canyon seemed to be laughing. Science. Such a fragile construct. Your people explain away what you do not understand and call it knowledge. My hand found the knife. Where is the real Jordan? Gone. Consumed. I needed the shape, the voice, the memories. The consumption is total. The thing took a step into the pool, water rippling around ankles that bent wrong. But you interest me more, Derek Hayes. The one who survived fire. The one who carries dead men in his head. I can smell trauma on you like smoke. Would you like to see them again? Your crew? I can wear their faces, can speak with their voices, can show you exactly what they looked like when the flames took them. My vision grayed at the edges. Flashback imminent. I recognized the symptoms from 2 years of dealing with them. Tunnel vision, time dilation, the sensation of heat on skin that was not really there. I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste copper, using pain to anchor myself to present reality. I would not break down, not here, not now. The Navajo have names for you, I said, my voice steady despite my pulse trying to burst through my chest wall. Yinald Lushi, skinwalker, witch who walks on 4 legs. The thing tilted Jordan's head too far, vertebrae popping audibly. The Diné fear us for good reason. We violated their most sacred taboos to gain this power. Killed family members, wore their skins, learned to walk in any form we choose. Your park is built on our hunting ground, Derek Hayes. This canyon belonged to us long before your people carved names into stone and called it conservation. It moved closer, the water barely rippling despite its movement, as if its body did not properly displace liquid. I stepped back, but the pool was deep here, the current stronger, my boots finding no purchase on slick stone. I can wear the fire for you, it whispered with Jordan's voice. Can show you how Aaron looked with his skin melting. How Cole screamed when his shelter failed. How Wyatt watched you abandon them. The one you ran from while he burned. The one whose eyes you see every time you close your own. My throat closed. The names hit me like physical blows. Aaron, Cole, Wyatt. Names I had not spoken aloud in months. Names this thing should not know. Names it had pulled from somewhere, either from Jordan's memories, if the naturalist had known my history, or from somewhere else, somewhere worse. The thing's form rippled beneath Jordan's stolen face. I could see bones shifting under skin, could see the outline of something larger and older rearranging itself, preparing to become something else. Jordan's face remained, but the body beneath began changing. Bones reorganizing with sounds like green wood breaking, skin stretching over a frame that was growing, elongating, becoming something that walked on 4 legs and 2 simultaneously. I ran. Not a decision. Pure animal response. I splashed through the pool, lost my footing, went under briefly into water so cold it stopped my breath, surfaced gasping, and scrambled for the far shore. For the narrow continuation of the canyon where the walls closed in tight enough that something large might not follow easily. Behind me, the thing laughed. A chorus of voices now. Jordan and others. Male voices, female voices, children's voices, an elderly woman's voice, all speaking in terrible harmony. Run, Derek Hayes. We enjoy the hunt. The fear seasons the meat. The canyon became a nightmare of narrow passages and waist-deep pools. Of places where I had to swim with my pack held overhead, of sections where the walls closed in so tight I could touch both sides with elbows extended. The thing followed. I could hear it moving behind me, sometimes splashing through water, sometimes the scrape of claws on stone, sometimes the slap of bare human feet, and always voices, always voices. Aaron's voice from 2 years ago. Derek, help me. The fire jumped the line. Where are you? Cole's voice. I cannot breathe. The smoke is too thick. Please. Wyatt's voice. Why did you leave us? Why did you run? My sister's voice, though my sister was alive in Phoenix and had never seen what the fire had done to me. I am ashamed of you, Derek. You let them die. My mother's voice. My cowardly son. My failure. Jordan's voice. You could have saved me if you had been braver. My lungs burned from exertion. My legs were lead. The canyon walls seemed to pulse, seemed to lean inward with each breath. The sandstone becoming organic, becoming throat, becoming the gullet of something vast swallowing me whole. I recognized these symptoms too. Panic attack compounding on physical exhaustion. My body trying to shut down, while my mind screamed that I had to keep moving. I burst into a wider section of the canyon and stopped, gasping. Dead end. A sheer wall rose 200 feet ahead of me. Smooth sandstone with no handholds, no way forward. A thin stream of water fell from a slot near the top, evaporating before it reached the pool below, the spray catching sunlight in a way that would have been beautiful if I had not been running for my life from something that should not exist. Trapped. Again. The thing appeared at the far end of the chamber, but it was not wearing Jordan anymore. It had chosen a different form, a form that made my heart stop. It had chosen Aaron Kessler. Perfect recreation down to the scar on his left forearm from a childhood accident, down to the way he stood with weight on his right leg because of an old knee injury from football, down to the pattern of stubble on his jaw that I had seen 1,000 times on the fire line. Aaron's face smiled at me with Aaron's familiar crooked grin, the one he used to flash when we were about to do something stupid and dangerous and probably against regulations. "End of the line, Hayes," it said with Aaron's voice, Aaron's accent, Aaron's habit of dropping consonants when he was tired. Just like before, nowhere left to run, except last time you ran while we burned. This time, I think you stay. The thing began to change again. Aaron's face melted, reformed, became something that was part human and part coyote, and part something older, something that predated both species. It dropped to 4 legs, then stood on 2, then seemed to exist in both states simultaneously, a quantum superposition of predator forms that my eyes could not properly process. My back hit the canyon wall. No escape, no way out, just like the fire, just like watching the flames close in while my crew screamed for help I could not give. My hand found the inReach satellite communicator on my belt, useless for calling rescue. Help would take hours I did not have, but it had one other function. I activated the SOS beacon. The thing laughed. "Who will save you, Derek Hayes? Your God, your Rangers. By the time they arrive, I will be wearing your skin. I will walk out of this canyon with your face. I will go to your housing. I will live your life. I have done it before. Easier than you would think. Humans see what they expect to see." My thumb found the GoPro controls on my chest rig. I activated recording. "My name is Derek Hayes," I said clearly, forcing my voice steady despite the terror clawing at my throat. "I am in Orderville Canyon, Zion National Park. If you find this footage, know that the Navajo legends are real. Skinwalkers exist. They can take any form, steal any face. Trust no one who comes out of this canyon, even if they look like me, even if they have my memories, especially then." The thing tilted its head. Too far. Always too far. The motion wrong in ways that bypassed conscious analysis and went straight to primal fear centers. Brave words, little ranger. But footage can be explained away. Hallucination. Heat stroke. Psychological break from PTSD. Your people are very good at denial. It lunged. I threw myself sideways into the pool, diving deep. The water was cold, shocking my system into crystal clarity, washing away the panic fog and leaving only survival instinct. I opened my eyes underwater and saw the thing above me, saw it had followed me in, saw its form rippling between states, human limbs becoming animal, becoming something else entirely. And I saw something else. In the deepest part of the pool, where the water was darkest, a crevice in the rock. Small. Maybe too small. But maybe not. My lungs were screaming for air. The thing was diving toward me, moving with horrible grace, its mouth open and filled with too many teeth arranged in configurations that no earthly predator had ever evolved. I kicked hard, pulling myself down toward the crevice, my pack snagging on stone. I shrugged out of it, let it float away, and squeezed into the gap with strength born of pure terror. The passage was tight, impossibly tight, my chest unable to fully expand as I wiggled forward in absolute darkness, rock scraping skin through my shirt, the space becoming smaller with every inch. For one terrible moment, I was certain I was stuck, that I would die here, wedged in stone, drowning as my air ran out with something horrible waiting just behind me. But then my hand found open space, and I pulled myself forward with the last of my strength and emerged gasping into an underwater cavern, some pocket of air trapped in the rock formation. I surfaced in darkness so complete, it had texture and breathed air that tasted of minerals and time, ancient air that had been trapped here since before humans walked the earth. Behind me, from the passage I had squeezed through, came the sound of something too large trying to force itself through a space too small. The scrape of claws on stone, a sound that might have been frustration or might have been laughter. Then silence. I floated in the dark, my body shaking with cold and adrenaline crash, and tried to orient myself. The cavern was small. I could touch the ceiling with my hand, could swim from one wall to another in 4 strokes. But there had to be another way out. Water was flowing in from somewhere, which meant it was flowing out somewhere else. I activated my phone's flashlight, praying the waterproof case had held. The beam cut through darkness, reflected off mineral-rich water, illuminated walls covered in formations that looked almost deliberate. And there, on the far wall, a passage leading up and out. I swam toward it, my muscles cramping from cold. The passage was dry, ascending at a steep angle, narrow enough that I had to crawl on hands and knees. My phone's light showed scratch marks in the stone, old marks, many of them, made by claws that were sometimes animal, sometimes human, sometimes both. This was a hunting ground. How many people had the skinwalker chased into this canyon over the decades, over the centuries? How many had found this same escape route, only to discover it led somewhere worse? The passage opened into a chamber, and my light found bones. Human bones. A lot of them. Arranged in patterns that suggested ritual, or maybe just the careful collecting of a predator who kept trophies. Skulls with elongated jaws, the bone structure warped in ways that spoke of transformation. Rib cages that had been broken and reset in wrong configurations. Femurs that showed evidence of gnawing, not animal gnawing, but the distinctive marks of human teeth. And in the center of the bone chamber, a figure. Not the skinwalker. Human. Female. Wearing the tattered remains of a Zion National Park uniform, the name tag was still visible in my flashlight beam, J. Blake. Jordan's eyes opened, and I saw consciousness return. Saw recognition flare in those brown irises I had last seen stolen and set into a wolf's skull. "Derek," Jordan whispered, voice raw from screaming or dehydration or both. "You found me. Oh God, you actually found me." I approached slowly, my mind cataloging injuries. Severe dehydration, signs of shock. Left ankle grotesquely swollen, probably broken. Lacerations on arms and legs from the crawl through stone. But alive. Definitely alive. Chest moving with shallow breaths, pulse visible at the throat, eyes tracking my movement with awareness. "How long have you been here?" I asked. "I do not know. It took me yesterday. Chased me into the canyon, into the pool, through the passage. I thought I was escaping, but I ended up here. It comes sometimes. Wears different faces. Talks with them. It has been trying to learn me. Studies how I move, how I speak." Jordan's voice cracked, breaking on the words. "I think it is going to replace me, wear me, and go back to the visitor center, and no one will know." I knelt beside Jordan, checking vitals, pulse rapid but steady, bad shape, but stable enough to move. "I activated my emergency beacon," I said. "Rescue will come." Jordan laughed, brittle as dry bone. "Rescue? You think they will find us? You think that thing will let them?" A hand grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "It showed me things, Derek. Memories. It is old. Older than the park. Older than European contact. The Navajo knew to avoid this canyon. They left warnings. But we built trails anyway, brought tourists, acted like we owned the land." "The Navajo," I said slowly, a thought forming through the fog of fear and exhaustion. "Do they have ways to fight it? To kill it? I do not know. Maybe. But you would need weapons we do not have. Silver. Specific ceremonies. Knowledge we have lost or never had." A sound echoed from the passage I had crawled through. Scraping. Something moving in the tunnel. "It knows you are here," Jordan whispered. "It has been waiting. This is its den, Derek. This is where it brings everything it catches." The scraping grew louder. I stood, putting myself between Jordan and the passage entrance. My knife felt pathetically inadequate. What could steel do against something that reformed its body at will? The thing emerged from the tunnel, but it was not wearing animal form now. It had chosen human. Specifically, it had chosen me. My own face looked at me from across the bone chamber. My own body moved with my mannerisms. My own voice spoke. "Interesting choice, Derek Hayes. Most run. You stayed to protect the girl. The fire did not burn that out of you after all." I stared at myself, at the perfect recreation down to the small scar over my left eyebrow from a childhood fall, down to the way I stood with slightly more weight on my right foot from an old hiking injury. The thing had done its homework, had studied me somehow, had learned enough to mirror me exactly. "Let Jordan go," I said. "You want to wear someone? Wear me. I am already broken. Jordan has a whole life ahead." My double smiled my smile. Noble. Futile. But noble. "I do not need permission, Derek Hayes. I take what I want. But I am curious. What do you think happens when I consume you? Do your memories become mine? Do I dream your dreams? Do I carry your dead crew in my head the way you do? I do not know, I said honestly. Neither do I. That is why it is interesting. The double moved closer, and I could see small imperfections now. The way its breathing was slightly off rhythm. The way it blinked too infrequently. The way its shadow fell at wrong angles to the light source, as if the physics of this world did not quite apply to it. Let me offer you truth, it said with my voice. I cannot be killed by your weapons, cannot be trapped by your tools. This canyon is mine, has been mine for longer than your species has had written language. The Dine knew to offer respect, to leave gifts, to avoid sacred spaces. Your people put up signs and call it conservation. Then what do you want? I asked. If you are going to kill us anyway, what is the point of talking? My double considered, head tilting in that wrong way that no human neck could manage. I want you to understand. Behind me, Jordan made a small sound. Pain or fear or both. I thought about my crew, about Aaron and Cole and Wyatt burning while I ran. Thought about carrying that guilt for 2 years, about the nightmares, about the way I could not look at fire without my pulse spiking to dangerous levels. Thought about the therapist saying that I had survived because I had made the right choice in an impossible situation. No, I said quietly. The double tilted its head. No, I am not accepting it. I am not prey. I am a human being with tools and knowledge and the capacity to learn. And I know something you do not. Oh, the thing sounded amused. What secret knowledge do you possess, Broken Ranger? I pulled out my phone. The screen showed 19% battery. Enough. I had been recording since entering the bone chamber. Video evidence of everything. Of the skinwalker wearing my face. Of Jordan alive. Of the bones. All uploading in small packets whenever my phone caught satellite signal through gaps in the rock above. I know you are not as patient as you claim, I said. If you were, you would wait for rescue to arrive. Kill them too. Wear their faces. But you are here now because you are hungry, because I activated a beacon and help is coming and you have a limited window. The double's smile faded. I know you cannot hold form forever, I continued, voice steady despite my racing heart. The Navajo legends say skinwalkers must return to human form to sleep. Say they are vulnerable during the change. Say they hoard the skins they have stolen because they need them to transform. I gestured at the bones surrounding us. These are not trophies. They are ingredients. You need human remains to maintain the ability, which means this chamber is important to you, which means you will not want it destroyed. I pulled the emergency flare from my cargo pocket, standard issue for Rangers, meant to signal rescuers or start emergency fires in survival situations. Magnesium core, burns at over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to ignite bone dust and dry tissue and the organic materials the skinwalker needed. You would not, the double said. And for the first time its voice carried something like uncertainty. I survived fire once by running, I said. Lost everything I cared about because I chose my life over theirs. Not this time. This time I burn it all and take you with me if I have to. I struck the flare. It ignited with a brilliant white light that filled the chamber, that made the bones cast twisted shadows on the walls, that revealed the skinwalker's true face beneath the stolen one. Something ancient and hungry and wrong, features that shifted between human and animal and things that were neither, a face that existed in multiple states simultaneously, all of them terrible. The thing screamed, not with my voice now, but with a chorus of every voice it had ever stolen, every person it had consumed, all speaking in agonized harmony, a sound that would haunt my nightmares for the rest of my life. It lunged at me, but I was already moving, already dropping the flare into the bone pile. Already grabbing Jordan, already dragging the injured naturalist toward the passage. The bones caught fast. Centuries of accumulated organic material igniting in a chain reaction. Dry tissue combusted. Ancient protein structures released their stored energy. The walls themselves seemed to burn, mineral deposits that had formed around the organic matter catching and spreading the flames in ways that defied normal combustion physics. The skinwalker thrashed in the inferno, its form rippling between shapes, unable to settle on any one configuration as the materials it needed to maintain cohesion burned away. I saw flashes of faces in the flames. Aaron, Cole, Wyatt, Jordan, dozens of others, maybe hundreds, all the stolen identities unraveling as their anchors turned to ash. I pulled Jordan into the passage. The heat pursued us. The smoke filled the tunnel, thick and acrid. And I knew this smoke, had known it 2 years ago, had breathed it while my crew died. My body wanted to shut down, wanted to curl into fetal position and wait for unconsciousness, for the end of fear and pain and guilt. But Jordan's hand was in mine, fingers gripping tight, and Jordan was alive, and this time, I could save someone. We emerged into the underwater cavern. I took the deepest breath my scorched lungs could manage, pulled Jordan under, swam for the crevice, squeezed through with the injured naturalist, the passage scraping us both raw, Jordan's broken ankle banging against stone as muffled screams echoed through the water. We surfaced in the main pool to find the canyon filled with late afternoon light and the sound of helicopters overhead. The in-reach beacon had worked. Rescue had arrived. I floated on my back, keeping Jordan's head above water, and watched the helicopter descend. Behind us, smoke poured from cracks in the canyon wall, black and oily, smelling of burnt hair and older things. Things that had been burning for a very, very long time. The rescue team pulled us out with practiced efficiency, asked questions I could not answer yet, stabilized Jordan's ankle, wrapped us both in thermal blankets despite the July heat. The lead ranger, a woman named Chen with gray streaks in her black hair and eyes that had seen things she did not talk about, looked at the smoke, looked at my expression, looked at the way my hands were steady despite everything. "What happened down there?" she asked. I thought about the truth, about skinwalkers and stolen faces and bone chambers, about the way the thing had worn my crew's voices like weapons, about how I had finally made a choice that did not end with me surviving alone. "Wildlife encounter," I said. "Trapped in a cave system. Started a fire to signal for help. Blake needs immediate medical attention." Chen studied me for a long moment, and I saw something in her eyes that suggested she knew I was lying, knew there was more to the story. But she was a park ranger in a land where ancient things still hunted, and some truths were not meant for official reports. "You did good, Hayes. You brought them home." In the helicopter, Jordan squeezed my hand. "Thank you," mouthed over the rotor noise. I nodded but did not speak. My throat was raw from smoke. My body was a catalog of injuries. My mind was already filing everything that had happened into the same dark space where I kept the fire, where Aaron and Cole and Wyatt lived in permanent loop. But Jordan was alive. That was different. That was new. The helicopter banked over Zion Canyon, the evening light painting the sandstone in shades of red and gold. Beautiful, deadly, ancient. The land remembered what humans forgot. Remembered when it belonged to things that wore faces like masks and hunted in the spaces between what was known and what was feared. 3 days later, I sat in my ranger housing and uploaded the footage from my phone to a private cloud account. Video of the skinwalker, of the bone chamber, of everything. Insurance, maybe. Evidence for whoever came next. Jordan had been airlifted to a hospital in St. George, recovering well, according to the official reports. Had told doctors nothing about what had happened beyond falling and hitting their head. Smart. Safer. I had visited once, had seen the way Jordan's hand shook when no one was looking, had recognized the beginning of the same road I had walked for 2 years. I left my therapist's contact information on the bedside table. My supervisor recommended counseling after the traumatic rescue event. I agreed, scheduled an appointment, knew I would probably actually go. The fire had taught me that running from trauma just meant it caught up eventually, in worse ways. But that night, I sat on my porch and watched the sun set over Zion Canyon. Thought about the Navajo warnings, about how my people had built trails through sacred spaces and called it progress, about the smoke still rising from cracks in Orderville Canyon, visible if you knew where to look, about whether the skinwalker had truly died or merely retreated to somewhere deeper, waiting for the burns to heal and the hunting grounds to be restocked. My phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "Thank you for not telling them the truth. They would not have believed it anyway." I typed a response. "You going to be okay?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, a reply. "Are you?" I thought about that. About Aaron and Cole and Wyatt. About the way guilt had eaten me alive for 2 years. About how I had finally made a choice that saved someone instead of just keeping myself alive. "Getting there," I typed. "Me too." I set my phone down and watched the stars emerge, pinpricks of light in darkening sky. Tomorrow I would go back to work, would guide tourists through the Narrows, would warn them about flash floods and heat exhaustion and staying on marked trails, would not mention the deeper dangers, the ones that did not appear in Park Service brochures, the ones that existed in the spaces where land remembered and legends breathed. But that night, I sat in the cooling desert air and felt, for the first time in 2 years, like maybe I had earned the right to survive. Not because I had run fast enough, Not because I had been lucky, but because when it mattered, when someone else's life was on the line, I had made the choice to stay and fight. The nightmares would still come, I knew that. Fire and smoke and screaming and guilt, but maybe mixed in with them now, there would be other dreams. Jordan alive, the helicopter rising, the moment of choosing to burn it all rather than run again. Maybe that was not redemption, but it was a start. In the distance, a coyote called. Just a coyote. Normal wildlife, nothing supernatural. Probably. I listened to it echo off canyon walls and smiled, dark humor finding me despite everything. I would never be certain again. Never walk through wilderness without wondering what else was watching. Never fully trust the boundary between natural and supernatural. But that was okay. That was honest. That was living with eyes open instead of pretending the world was smaller and safer than it really was. 2 weeks passed. The smoke stopped rising from Orderville Canyon. The rescue made local news, then faded from public attention. Jordan returned to work on crutches, assigned to desk duty until the ankle healed. We did not talk about what had happened, not directly, but sometimes our eyes would meet across the visitor center, and something would pass between us. Recognition, understanding, the shared weight of knowledge that could not be spoken aloud. I thought it was over. Thought the Skinwalker had burned with its collection of stolen faces. Thought I could go back to the slow work of healing from the fire, now with the added complexity of healing from this. I was wrong. The first sign came on a Tuesday evening. I was hiking the West Rim Trail, off-duty, trying to reconnect with the land in ways that did not involve search and rescue or creatures from Navajo legend. The sunset was painting Angel's Landing in shades of orange and pink, and I had stopped to photograph it when I noticed the tracks. Coyote prints in the red sand. Normal, expected. Coyotes were common in Zion, but these prints transitioned. Over the course of 20 feet, the coyote tracks elongated. The toes stretched. The pad reshaped into something more like a heel. By the end, what I was looking at were human footprints. Bare, fresh, leading toward the canyon rim and the 1,000-foot drop beyond. I followed them with my heart hammering against my ribs. The prints ended at the edge, just stopped, as if whatever had made them had stepped off into empty air. I looked down, expecting to see a body on the rocks below, but there was nothing. Just sandstone and shadow and the distant glitter of the Virgin River. Behind me, a voice spoke. Did you really think fire would kill something that has lived for 1,000 years? I spun. The trail was empty. No one there. Just rock and scrub and the whisper of wind through pinyon pine. But the voice had been real. Had been close. Had been familiar. It had been Aaron's voice. I did not sleep that night. Sat in my housing with every light on, my knife on the table in front of me, watching the windows and listening for sounds that did not belong. The logical part of my mind insisted I had imagined it. Auditory hallucination. PTSD symptom. My traumatized brain conjuring threats from nothing. But I had seen the tracks, had photographed them with my phone, had watched them transition from animal to human with my own eyes. The Skinwalker was not dead, it was hunting again. And this time, it was hunting me specifically. The second sign came 3 days later. I was leading a group of tourists through the Riverside Walk when I spotted a figure on the far bank. Human. Male. Wearing firefighter turnout gear that was blackened and melted. Fused to the body beneath in ways that spoke of death by burning. Cole Bannister's face looked at me from across the river. Or what was left of his face. The fire had taken most of it, had melted features into a topography of scar tissue and exposed bone. But I would have recognized those eyes anywhere. Had seen them in my nightmares for 2 years. You left me, Cole's mouth said, though I was too far away to hear the words. You ran, and I burned. The tourists were asking me questions. Something about the geology, the formation of the canyon, the age of the rocks. I could not hear them. Could only stare at the figure on the far bank, at the accusing eyes, at the burned hands reaching toward me. Then I blinked, and Cole was gone. Just riverbank and tourists and the confused sound of someone asking if I was okay. I was not okay. I knew that. Had known it for 2 years. But this was different. This was not memory intruding on present. This was something external, something deliberately targeting me, using my guilt as a weapon. The Skinwalker was playing with me, drawing out the hunt, enjoying my fear. I called the number Jordan had texted from. No answer. Went to Jordan's housing that evening. No one home. Asked at the visitor center if anyone had seen the seasonal naturalist recently. Got strange looks and headshakes. Jordan had been at work that morning, had clocked in, worked the desk, clocked out. But no one could remember actually seeing Jordan during those hours, could not recall any specific interaction or conversation. Skin crawling, I pulled the duty roster. Jordan was scheduled for a solo patrol of the Kolob Canyon section tomorrow. Remote territory. Limited radio coverage, the kind of place where someone could disappear and not be found for days. I requested to be assigned to the same patrol, got approval without question. The other rangers thought I was being protective after the rescue, developing feelings maybe. They were not entirely wrong, though not in the way they assumed. That night, I dreamed of fire. But it was different this time. I was not on the ridge with my crew. I was in the bone chamber beneath Orderville Canyon, and the flames were all around me, but they did not burn. They spoke. "We are old, Derek Hayes." The fire voice was the Skinwalker's voice. Was all the voices it had stolen. Was the chorus of the consumed. Older than your guilt. Older than your fire. We were hunting these canyons when your ancestors were still learning to walk upright. You burned one of our dens. You cost us centuries of collected forms. Do you think we will simply forgive that? In the dream, faces formed in the flames. Aaron, Cole, Wyatt, but also Jordan, also my sister, also my mother, also faces I did not recognize, the Skinwalker's previous victims, all of them burning, all of them screaming, all of them reaching toward me with charred hands. "We will take everything you love," the fire voice said, "everyone you care about. We will wear their faces and speak with their voices, and you will never know which is real and which is us until it is too late." This is not a hunt anymore, Derek Hayes. This is punishment. This is revenge. I woke up screaming, which was not unusual. What was unusual was the smell. Smoke. Not the phantom smoke of nightmare, but real smoke, wood smoke, close and acrid. My housing was on fire. I rolled out of bed as the ceiling collapsed where my head had been, scrambled for the door, found it blocked by flames that moved wrong, that twisted and reached like fingers, that formed shapes that might have been faces, went for the window instead, smashed through glass, landed on red dirt and rolled, putting out the flames that had caught on my clothes. Behind me, my housing burned with hungry intensity. Other rangers were emerging from their units, shouting, calling for fire suppression. I watched the flames consume everything I owned and saw, in the heart of the inferno, a figure standing motionless, Aaron's shape, Aaron's posture, Aaron's burned face smiling at me through the fire. Then the roof collapsed, and the figure was gone, and all that remained was smoke and ash and the sound of sirens approaching from the main road. The investigation concluded that the fire was electrical in origin. Faulty wiring in an old building. No arson suspected. No criminal charges filed. The Park Service offered me temporary housing and sympathy and time off to recover from the trauma. I did not take the time off. Could not. Jordan was scheduled for that Colo patrol, and I knew with a certainty that went beyond logic or evidence, that the Skinwalker was planning something. That it had burned my housing as a distraction, as a warning, as the opening move in a longer game. I found Jordan at the ranger station the next morning, gearing up for the patrol. The naturalist looked healthy, whole, completely normal. Smiled when I approached. Expressed concern about the fire, about whether I was okay, about whether I needed anything. I watched Jordan's face while we talked. Watched for the small tells I had learned to recognize. The too slow blink. The wrong muscle sequences and expressions. The shadow falling at angles that did not match the light source. Everything looked right. Every detail perfect. But that was the problem with Skinwalkers. They were perfect mimics. The only way to know for certain was to wait for them to make a mistake. Or to force them to make one. "Jordan," I said casually, "do you remember what you told me in the bone chamber? About what the Skinwalker showed you?" A flicker of something in those brown eyes. Confusion, maybe. Or recognition. "I told you it showed me memories. That it was old. That the Navajo knew to avoid the canyon." "Yes," I said. "But do you remember what you said after that? About how you felt when it was studying you?" Jordan was quiet for a long moment. I watched the throat work, watched the eyes move, watched for any sign that this was not the person I had rescued, that it was something else wearing familiar skin. I said I thought it was going to replace me. Jordan finally answered, that it would wear me and go back to work, and no one would know. "That is right," I said. "And do you remember what I said in response?" Jordan's face went very still. A long pause. Too long. The kind of pause that meant searching through stolen memories for information that might not be there. Then Jordan smiled. The wrong smile. The too perfect smile. Muscles pulling in sequences that suggested operation from the inside rather than genuine emotion. I remember you said the beacon would bring rescue, the thing wearing Jordan's face said. And it did. But we are patient creatures, Derek Hayes. We can wait, can watch, can study, can learn to be anyone, perfectly, for years if necessary. The other rangers in the station were not looking at us. Were going about their morning routines as if nothing was wrong, as if there was not a monster standing in their midst, wearing their colleagues' skin. What did you do with the real Jordan? I asked, my voice steady despite the horror crawling through my veins. The thing tilted its head. That wrong angle. That impossible articulation. What makes you think there ever was a real Jordan? Or a real anything? Maybe you are the only human here, Derek Hayes. Maybe you have been surrounded by us since you arrived. Maybe every face you have trusted has been one of us, learning you, studying you, waiting for the right moment. It stepped closer, close enough that I could smell it now, underneath the human scent. Something older. Something that reminded me of the bone chamber, of ancient organic material, of centuries of stolen lives. Or maybe there is no one here at all, it whispered with Jordan's voice. Maybe you are alone in your cabin, hallucinating from smoke inhalation, and none of this is real. How would you know? How could you ever be certain? That was when I pulled the knife. Not to attack. I knew better than that. Steel would not kill it. But the knife was not for killing. It was for proving. I drew the blade across my palm. Blood welled, red and warm, and undeniably real. I felt the pain, sharp and grounding. I was here. This was happening. I was not hallucinating. The thing watched my blood drip onto the floor. Its expression did not change, but something in its eyes shifted. Interest, maybe, or hunger. You bleed, it observed. You can be hurt. You are so very fragile, Derek Hayes. So easy to break. Why do you fight? Why not accept the natural order? Because I am not prey, I said. And I learned something from you. Something important. The thing tilted its head again. Oh? What did you learn from something as old and terrible as me? That you can be hurt too. That fire damages you. That destroying your den cost you something real. Something that matters. You are not invulnerable. You are not inevitable. You are just old and arrogant and so used to humans being afraid that you have forgotten what we can do when we stop running. I held up my phone. Had been recording since I walked in. Had captured everything. The wrong movements. The impossible angles. The confession that it was not Jordan. I do not need to kill you, I said. I just need people to know you exist. I just need to break the pattern of denial. Once humans know what to look for, once they start paying attention, your hunting ground becomes a lot more dangerous. The thing stared at me. For the first time, I saw something that might have been uncertainty in its stolen eyes. You would not be believed, it said, but there was doubt in Jordan's voice now. Your species excels at denial. They will explain it away. Heat stroke, mental illness, special effects. They will find any reason to avoid admitting that their world is not what they think. Maybe, I said, but maybe not. And either way, you will have to be more careful. We'll have to look over your shoulder. We'll have to wonder, every time you hunt, whether this is the time someone is watching. Is that worth it? Is revenge on one human worth losing your anonymity forever? The thing was silent for a long moment. Around us, the other rangers continued their routines, oblivious to the confrontation happening in their midst. Then Jordan's face smiled. Not the wrong smile this time. Something closer to genuine amusement. You are interesting, Derek Hayes. More interesting than most. Perhaps we were too hasty in making this personal. The thing stepped back. Its form flickered, just for a moment. I glimpsed something beneath the stolen skin, something with too many joints and the wrong number of eyes. Then it stabilized, and Jordan was standing there, looking confused. Derek? Jordan blinked, looked around, seemed disoriented. Sorry, I zoned out. What were we talking about? I watched carefully. Watched for the tells, but everything was different now. The movements natural, the expressions genuine, the shadow falling correctly. The skinwalker was gone, had retreated back into whatever space it occupied when it was not wearing human form. Had decided for now that I was not worth the risk. Nothing, I said. Just going over the patrol route. You ready to head out? Jordan nodded. still looking slightly confused but accepting the explanation. Yeah, let me just grab my pack. I watched Jordan walk away. Watched the gait, the posture, the way weight shifted from foot to foot, all normal, all human. But I would never be certain again. That was the skinwalker's real weapon, not teeth or claws or stolen faces. Doubt. The slow poison of never knowing who was real. That evening, after the patrol passed without incident, I sat in my temporary housing and thought about what came next. The skinwalker was still out there, would always be out there. I could not kill it, could not expose it, could only live with the knowledge of its existence and try to protect the people around me. I pulled up the footage I had accumulated, the phone recordings, the GoPro captures, hours of evidence that would be dismissed as hoax or delusion by anyone who did not want to believe. I encrypted it, backed it up to multiple locations, made sure it would survive even if I did not. Then I started writing, not an official report, not a scientific paper, a story. A warning dressed as fiction, because sometimes fiction is the only way to tell truths that reality refuses to acknowledge. I wrote about fire and guilt and running, about creatures that wear faces and speak with dead voices, about a park ranger who found something in the red canyons of Utah that should not exist, about how he survived, not by running, but by choosing to stand and fight. I did not know if anyone would believe it, did not know if belief even mattered. But the story would exist, would spread, would plant seeds of awareness in minds that might otherwise dismiss the impossible. And maybe, someday, someone else would walk into a canyon and see tracks that changed from animal to human and remember a story they had read once, would trust their instincts instead of explaining them away, would survive because a broken ranger in Zion had decided to leave a record. That would have to be enough. The sun set over the canyon as I finished writing, red light fading to purple, purple to black, black to the star-scattered infinity of a desert night. Beautiful, dangerous, ancient. Somewhere out there in the spaces between what was known and what was feared, something old was watching, waiting, planning. But so was I. I saved the document, closed my laptop, walked out onto the porch of my temporary housing, and looked up at the stars. Tomorrow, I would go back to work, would protect tourists who had no idea what lurked in the land they thought they owned. Would watch for tracks that should not exist and faces that moved wrong, would carry the weight of knowledge that could not be shared and the burden of vigilance that could never end. But tonight, just for a moment, I let myself feel something like peace. I had faced the fire twice now. The first time, I had run. The second time, I had stood my ground. I did not know what the third time would bring, did not know if I would survive it. But I knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that I would not run again. Some stories do not have endings. Some monsters do not stay dead. Some fears follow you forever, no matter how fast you run or how far you go. But some people learn to live with the dark, learn to carry impossible knowledge without breaking. Learn that survival is not about escaping fear, but about finding the strength to face it again and again, for as long as it takes. I am Derek Hayes. I survived fire. I survived things worse than fire. I will keep surviving, keep watching, keep warning, until I cannot anymore. And if you are reading this, if you have made it to the end of my story, I need you to remember one thing. Pay attention to the tracks. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. And if you ever find yourself in a canyon where the shadows move independently and the coyotes stand on two legs and your name echoes back at you in voices that should not exist, do not run. Stand your ground. Light your fire. Make them regret choosing you as prey. Because sometimes the only way out is through, and sometimes the most human thing you can do is refuse to be afraid. A coyote called in the distance. Just a coyote, normal wildlife. Probably. I listened to it echo off canyon walls and smiled into the darkness. Let them come. I was ready. Deep within Mark Twain National Forest in Missouri, a place riddled with hidden limestone caves, our journey began on a cool evening in the fall of 2021. I hiked alongside my longtime friend Ethan, our packs heavy as damp earth, and pine filled the air. The trail was not marked on any map, leading into a valley I had discovered 3 years earlier during a solo trip. As we descended, cell service vanished, and the forest grew unnervingly quiet. Ethan followed my lead without question, unaware that this valley was far from empty. My name is Marcus Cole. I have been a forest ranger in Mark Twain National Forest for 11 years. I have seen things in these woods that do not fit neatly into incident reports. I have filed paperwork that describes events in clinical language because the truth would get me transferred to a desk job in Jefferson City. I have learned when to speak and when to stay silent. But this story needs to be told because people keep disappearing and no one is asking the right questions. I met Ethan Mercer in college. We studied forestry together at the University of Missouri, spent weekends camping in places most students never heard of, and promised each other we would work in the same district after graduation. Life had other plans. Ethan went private sector, consulting for timber companies and doing environmental impact assessments. I went federal, took the ranger position, and settled into a cabin 12 miles from the nearest paved road. We stayed in touch through phone calls and occasional visits, but the years stretched the friendship thin the way distance always does. When Ethan called me in September of 2021 and asked if I wanted to show him something interesting, I did not hesitate. He was between contracts, restless, and looking for an adventure that did not involve spreadsheets. I told him about the valley. I told him I had found something there that I could not explain, and that I wanted a second pair of eyes before I decided what to do about it. What I did not tell him was that 2 hikers had gone missing near that valley in the past 18 months. I did not tell him that both disappearances happened in autumn. Both involved experienced outdoorsmen who knew the forest well, and both left behind gear that was found scattered along unmarked trails. I did not tell him that the official reports blamed animal attacks despite the absence of blood, remains, or any physical evidence of violence. I did not tell him because I was not sure what I believed yet. I wanted to see his reaction to the valley before I colored his perception with my own fears. We parked at the Berryman trailhead around 4 in the afternoon. The lot was empty except for a rusted pickup that had been there for at least a week based on the leaves piled against the tires. I made a note of the plate number out of habit and locked my truck. Ethan grabbed his pack from the back seat and adjusted the straps. He was thinner than I remembered, lines around his eyes that had not been there 5 years ago, but he moved with the same confident energy. "Good to see you, Marcus," he said. "You too. So where's this mystery valley of yours?" "About 4 miles in. Off trail for the last 2. He grinned. "Just like old times." We started walking. The Berryman Trail is well maintained, wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side, with blazes every 100 yards and signage at major intersections. It winds through second-growth oak and hickory, crosses a handful of creeks, and connects to a network of smaller paths that spread across the forest like capillaries. Most hikers stick to the marked routes. The terrain is rough enough that going off-trail means dealing with dense underbrush, sudden elevation changes, and the constant risk of losing your bearings. The first 2 miles were easy. We talked about nothing important, caught up on mutual friends and old professors, complained about the bureaucracy in our respective jobs. The sun filtered through the canopy in golden columns that shifted with the breeze. Squirrels chattered in the branches overhead. It felt like any other autumn hike in any other forest. Then we turned off the trail. The underbrush closed in immediately. Thorny vines grabbed at our pants and low branches forced us to duck every few steps. The ground was uneven, covered with fallen leaves that hid rocks and roots and sudden dips. I led the way, following landmarks I had memorized 3 years earlier. A lightning-scarred oak, a boulder shaped like a crouching animal, a dry creek bed that ran northeast before disappearing into a tangle of deadfall. Ethan kept pace without complaining, but I heard his breathing get heavier as the terrain got worse. We were both in good shape, but this was not a casual stroll. This was work. "How much farther?" he asked after about an hour. "Another mile, maybe less." The light was fading. Sunset was still 2 hours away, but the canopy had thickened overhead, blocking most of the direct sun. The forest floor was dim and gray, and the temperature had dropped several degrees. I pulled a flashlight from my pack and clipped it to my chest strap. That is when I noticed the silence. No birds, no squirrels, no insects buzzing or leaves rustling in the wind. The forest had gone completely still, like someone had pressed mute on the world. I stopped walking and held up my hand. Ethan stopped behind me. "What?" he whispered. "Listen." He listened. I watched his face change as he realized what was wrong. His eyes moved across the trees, searching for movement, finding nothing. "That is not normal," he said. "No." We stood there for maybe 30 seconds, waiting for the forest to resume its usual sounds. It did not. The silence pressed against my eardrums like a physical weight. I felt my pulse in my temples and the slow creep of sweat down my spine. "Keep moving," I said. "Stay close." We walked. The silence followed us. Every footstep sounded impossibly loud, cracking twigs and crunching leaves like small explosions in the quiet. I found myself holding my breath between steps, trying to move without making noise, which was ridiculous because there was nothing to hide from. Nothing I could see, anyway. The valley appeared suddenly. One moment we were pushing through dense brush, and the next, we were standing at the edge of a steep slope that dropped maybe 100 feet into a bowl-shaped depression. The valley floor was covered with tall grass that had gone gold with the season, and in the center of the grass was a structure. It was a cabin, or it had been once. The roof had partially collapsed, and the walls were gray with age and weather. No windows, just dark openings that stared up at us like empty eye sockets. A stone chimney rose from one end, cracked and leaning slightly to the left. Ethan let out a low whistle. "You found an abandoned cabin in the middle of nowhere and you did not tell anyone?" "I told you. I mean officially. This should be documented, mapped. It is not on any map I have access to. I checked historical records, survey data, everything. This valley does not exist on paper." He stared at me. "How is that possible?" "That is what I want to find out." We descended the slope carefully, using exposed roots and rocks as handholds. The grass at the bottom was waist-high and still wet from morning dew despite the hour. It soaked through my pants as we pushed toward the cabin. The structure looked even worse up close. The wood was rotted soft in places, and the door hung crooked on one hinge. There was no path leading to the entrance, no sign that anyone had been here in decades. Except there was. I stopped about 20 feet from the door and pointed at the ground. Ethan looked down and saw what I saw. A trail through the grass. Flattened stalks forming a narrow path that led from the tree line on the eastern edge of the valley directly to the cabin door. Recent enough that the grass had not sprung back yet. Someone had walked this route within the past few days. Ethan crouched and examined the trail. His expression had changed from curious to cautious. "Bootprints," he said. "Multiple sets, different sizes, at least 3 people." "I know. Marcus, what is going on here?" "I do not know. That is why I brought you." He stood up and looked at the cabin. The door was a dark rectangle, revealing nothing of what lay inside. The silence was still absolute, pressing down on us from every direction. I felt watched, though I could not have said by what. "We should check inside," I said. "We should call for backup. No signal. We have not had signal since we left the trail." Ethan pulled out his phone and confirmed it. 0 bars. He put it away and unclipped the flashlight from his pack. "Together then," he said. We approached the cabin. The door creaked when I pushed it open, a long, low sound that echoed across the silent valley. Inside was darkness. My flashlight beam cut through it and revealed a single room, maybe 15 by 20 feet. Wooden floor covered with dirt and debris, a rusted stove in one corner, a collapsed bunk frame against the far wall, and in the center of the room, arranged in a neat circle, were 7 pairs of hiking boots. I stopped in the doorway. Ethan stopped beside me. The boots were different sizes, different brands, different levels of wear. Some were caked with dried mud. Some looked almost new. They were arranged toe-in, forming a perfect circle about 4 feet in diameter. In the center of the circle was a small pile of objects. I moved closer and crouched to examine them. Wallets. 7 wallets, each one open, each one displaying a driver's license. I read the names without touching anything. David Chen, Melissa Torres, Robert Whitfield, Sarah Blackwood, James Duncan, Patricia Reyes. Thomas Okonkwo. I recognized two of the names. David Chen and Sarah Blackwood were the hikers who had gone missing. Their cases were still open, still listed as unsolved. The other 5 names meant nothing to me, but that did not mean they were not missing persons from other jurisdictions, other forests, other states. Ethan was breathing fast behind me. Marcus, we need to leave. Right now. I stood up. He was right. This was a crime scene, and we were contaminating it by being here. We needed to get back to the trailhead, find a signal, and call law enforcement, state police, FBI, whoever handled this kind of thing. This was beyond my authority and beyond my training. But I could not move. Something was holding me in place, some instinct that said leaving now would be a mistake, that there was more to see, more to understand, and that if I walked away without that understanding, I would never get another chance. The humming started. It came from everywhere at once, low and steady, like a single note held on a pipe organ. It filled the cabin and pressed against my skull and made my teeth ache. Ethan grabbed my arm and pulled, but I was already moving, already heading for the door. We burst out of the cabin and into the valley. The humming followed us. It was not coming from the cabin. It was coming from the trees, from the grass, from the air itself. The whole valley was vibrating with it, resonating like the inside of a bell. "Run," I said. We ran. We crashed through the tall grass toward the slope we had descended. The humming got louder with every step, rising in pitch, becoming something that was not quite music and not quite noise. It pressed against my thoughts and made it hard to focus on where I was putting my feet. Ethan stumbled. I grabbed his pack and hauled him upright. We kept moving. The slope was ahead, the trees beyond it, the trail somewhere past that. We just had to keep moving. Then Ethan stopped. I turned and saw him standing frozen, staring at something I could not see. His flashlight had fallen to the ground and was pointing at an angle, illuminating the grass near his feet. His face was blank, empty, like someone had wiped away every expression he had ever made. "Ethan," I said. "Ethan, we have to go." He did not respond. He did not move. The humming was deafening now, filling my head, drowning out everything else. I grabbed his arm and pulled. He resisted, planted his feet, refused to budge. Then he spoke. His voice was flat, monotone, nothing like the Ethan I knew. "They are not missing," he said. "They are here. They have always been here. I do not remember how I got him up the slope. I do not remember the hike back through the underbrush or the return to the trail. I remember fragments, dragging him by the arm, his feet moving mechanically like he was walking in his sleep, the humming fading behind us as we put distance between ourselves and the valley. The return of normal forest sounds, birds and insects and wind, as we crossed some invisible boundary. I remember reaching the truck at dusk and finding Ethan slumped against the passenger door, conscious but unresponsive. I remember driving to the ranger station and calling for medical assistance. I remember answering questions from my supervisor and then from state police investigators and then from federal agents who never told me which agency they worked for. I remember telling the truth and watching it get written down in language that made it sound like something else. Disorientation due to dehydration, possible exposure to toxic plant material, auditory hallucinations consistent with exhaustion. Ethan was taken to a hospital in Springfield. I was placed on administrative leave pending a psychological evaluation. That was October of 2021. Ethan spent 3 weeks in the hospital. When he was released, he did not remember anything after we left the marked trail. He did not remember the valley, the cabin, the boots, the wallets, the humming. He remembered hiking with me and then waking up in a hospital bed with an IV in his arm. The doctors called it a dissociative episode triggered by stress. His wife blamed me for taking him somewhere dangerous without proper preparation. Our friendship did not survive. I have not spoken to him since. The investigation into the valley lasted 2 months. I gave coordinates, I gave directions, I drew maps. Search teams went in 3 times. They found nothing, no valley, no cabin, no evidence that anything I described existed. The coordinates I provided led to an unremarkable stretch of forest that looked like every other stretch of forest in the district. Dense trees, rough terrain, nothing special. My supervisor suggested I had gotten turned around and described a different location than the one I actually visited. I knew that was not true, but I had no way to prove it. The GPS on my phone showed a route that ended at the edge of the marked trail and did not continue into the area I remembered hiking through. The timestamps showed gaps I could not explain. 4 hours of my day were simply missing from the record. I passed my psychological evaluation. I returned to work. I filed reports and maintained trails and answered questions from hikers who wanted to know the best routes for viewing fall foliage. I did not talk about the valley. I did not talk about Ethan. I did not talk about the 7 pairs of boots arranged in a circle around 7 open wallets, but I kept a list of the names: David Chen, Melissa Torres, Robert Whitfield, Sarah Blackwood, James Duncan, Patricia Reyes, Thomas Okonkwo. I searched for them in missing persons databases. I found 4 of them: David Chen and Sarah Blackwood, the 2 I already knew about. Robert Whitfield, a hiker from Kansas who disappeared in the Ozarks in 2019. Patricia Reyes, a nature photographer from Texas who went missing during a solo trip through Missouri in early 2021. The other 3 names returned nothing. Either they had not been reported missing, or they were listed under different circumstances, or they did not exist at all. I kept searching. I kept asking questions. And slowly, I started to find patterns. All 4 confirmed missing persons had disappeared in autumn. All 4 had been experienced outdoorsmen or women who knew how to handle themselves in the wilderness. All 4 had last been seen in or near Mark Twain National Forest. And all 4 cases had been closed without resolution, attributed to accidents or animal attacks or voluntary disappearance. The official explanations did not match the evidence. Gear found scattered but intact. No signs of struggle, no remains, no witnesses, just people who walked into the forest and never walked out. I started keeping an unofficial file: printouts, notes, maps marked with disappearance locations. I stored it in a lockbox under my bed and told no one about it. I was not sure what I was looking for or what I would do if I found it. I just knew that something was wrong, and that the people who should have been investigating were either ignoring it or actively covering it up. In March of 2022, I found the first orange tape. It was tied to a trail marker about half a mile from the Berryman trailhead. Bright orange survey tape, the kind construction crews use to mark boundaries or flag hazards. It was knotted in a neat bow, clean edges, deliberately placed. I stopped and stared at it for maybe a minute before I untied it and put it in my pocket. Survey tape was common in the forest. We used it all the time for trail maintenance and boundary marking. But this tape was not ours. The color was wrong, the material was wrong, and most importantly, it was tied in a location that had no purpose. Nothing was being surveyed here. Nothing was being marked. I started noticing more of them. Always orange, always tied in neat bows, always in locations that made no sense. On tree branches, on fence posts, on the handles of trail gates. Never more than 1 per location. Never in a pattern I could decipher, but consistent enough that I knew they were connected. I asked other rangers if they had seen them. Most said no. 2 said yes, but thought they were left by hunters or hikers marking personal routes. No one thought they were significant. I thought they were very significant. In June of 2022, a hiker named Caroline Marsh disappeared near the Big Piney River. She was 28 years old, an experienced backpacker from Chicago who had hiked solo through Yellowstone, Glacier, and the Appalachian Trail without incident. She had registered at the ranger station, provided a detailed itinerary, and checked all the boxes for a safe trip. She was supposed to return after 4 days. She did not. Search and rescue found her tent on day 6. It was set up properly, staked down, zipped closed. Inside were her sleeping bag, her pack, her food supplies, and her phone. The phone was dead, but when it was charged, it showed no calls or messages after the first day. Her last text was to her mother, sent at 9:47 p.m. on the night she arrived. Made camp, beautiful spot by the river, going to sleep early so I can catch the sunrise. Talk tomorrow. Love you. There was no tomorrow. There was no Caroline. There was no explanation. Her case got more attention than the others because she had family with money and connections. Private investigators were hired. Reward posters were printed. Local news ran the story for 2 weeks before moving on to other tragedies. The official conclusion was that she had fallen into the river and drowned, though no body was ever recovered. I went to her campsite 3 days after the search was called off. It was a 4-mile hike from the nearest road, through terrain that got progressively rougher as you approached the river. The tent was gone, taken as evidence, but the fire ring she had built was still there. Rocks arranged in a circle, ash and charred wood in the center. Everything standard, except for the orange tape. It was tied to a sapling about 30 feet from the fire ring. Same color, same neat bow, same clean edges. I walked over and examined it without untying it. The knot was identical to the others I had found. The placement was deliberate, positioned so that anyone standing at the fire ring would see it clearly. I took a photograph and marked the location on my map. Then I started searching the area. I found 8 more pieces of tape within a quarter mile of the campsite. They formed a rough path leading away from the river into the forest toward a section of land that was not covered by any maintained trail. I followed them. The path led to a ravine. Steep walls, maybe 40 feet deep, with a narrow stream running along the bottom. The tape continued down one side, tied to roots and rocks, marking a route that was difficult but passable. I descended. At the bottom of the ravine, half hidden by overgrown brush, was a steel door set into the rock face. It was not natural. Nothing about it was natural. The frame was bolted into the limestone, the hinges were heavy-duty industrial, and the surface was painted dark green to blend with the surrounding vegetation. There was a padlock on the hasp, standard combination lock, nothing special. I stood there for a long time, staring at that door. I was alone, no backup, no radio contact, no one who knew where I was. If I opened that door and something happened, no one would come looking for me for days, maybe longer. But Caroline Marsh had walked this way. The tape told me that. And whatever was behind that door might tell me what had happened to her, and to the others, and to the valley that existed one day and vanished the next. I pulled out my multi-tool and examined the padlock. It was a standard master lock, nothing fancy, 4-digit combination. I had seen these broken before, and I knew the technique. You pulled tension on the shackle while rotating the dials, feeling for the slight catch when a digit aligned. It took time, but it worked. It took me 23 minutes. The lock clicked open. I removed it from the hasp and set it on the ground. The door was heavy, and it took both hands to pull it open. The hinges groaned but did not stick. Someone had oiled them recently. Inside was darkness. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped through. The passage was carved directly into the limestone, rough walls that showed tool marks, ceiling low enough that I had to duck my head in places. The floor was packed dirt, dry and hard, with no footprints visible. The air smelled stale but not dangerous. I checked my monitor out of habit. Oxygen at 20.8%, CO2 negligible. Safe to proceed. I walked. The passage ran straight for maybe 100 feet, then turned left and descended. The walls got smoother as I went deeper, less tool marks, more natural formation. I was entering a cave system, probably one of the hundreds that riddled the Ozark limestone. Most of them were unmapped. Most of them had never been explored by anyone official. The descent continued for another 10 minutes. I tracked my progress by counting steps and estimating grade. Maybe 200 feet below the surface, give or take. The temperature dropped steadily, stabilizing around 55 degrees. The silence was absolute. No dripping water, no air movement, nothing but my own footsteps and breathing. Then I heard the humming. It started so faintly, I was not sure I was actually hearing it. A low drone, barely audible, like the afterimage of a sound rather than a sound itself. I stopped walking and listened. The drone continued. It did not change pitch or volume. It just existed, steady and constant, coming from somewhere ahead. I kept moving. The passage opened into a chamber, roughly circular, maybe 30 feet in diameter. My flashlight swept across the walls and floor, cataloging everything. There were tables, 4 of them, folding camp tables set up in a row along the far wall. On the tables were plastic storage bins, the same kind you buy at any hardware store. Translucent sides, snap-on lids. Each bin had a strip of duct tape on the front with writing on it. I moved closer to read. The first bin was labeled Autumn 2019, Whitfield. The second was labeled Spring 2020, Torres. The third was labeled Autumn 2020, Blackwood. The fourth was labeled Summer 2022, Marsh. There were more bins on the other tables. I counted 12 total. 12 labels, 12 names. Some I recognized from my research, some I did not. I reached for the first bin. Do not touch those. The voice came from behind me. Female, calm, professional. I spun around and my flashlight beam caught a woman standing at the entrance to the chamber. She was wearing ranger uniform, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, no visible weapon. I recognized her face but could not place it. She stepped forward and her name came to me. Diana Reese, district naturalist. She had been with the Forest Service for maybe 5 years, longer than me. We had worked together on a few projects, mostly wildlife surveys and educational programs. She was good at her job, friendly, normal. She did not look normal now. Her eyes were wrong, too calm, too still, like someone watching a movie they had seen 100 times. She moved with a smoothness that did not match the rough terrain, like she was gliding rather than walking. Her hands hung at her sides, relaxed, but I noticed the way her fingers were slightly curved, ready to grab or strike. "Diana," I said, "what is this place?" She stopped about 10 feet from me. "You should not have found this, Marcus. The tape was not for you." "What tape? The orange tape?" She nodded once. "That marks routes. Paths. Not for anyone from the service. You were never supposed to follow it. Paths to where? To this?" She did not answer. Her eyes moved past me to the bins on the tables. Something in her expression shifted. Not quite emotion, but something close. Recognition, maybe, or satisfaction. "You have seen the names," she said. "Yes. Then you understand." "I do not understand anything. These are missing persons, 12 missing persons. You have files on them. You have bins with their names. Diana, what is happening here?" She smiled. It was a terrible smile, too wide, too slow, like she was remembering how smiles were supposed to work. "They are not missing," she said. "They are found. They are all found. They come to the forest looking for something. Peace, adventure, escape. And the forest gives them what they are looking for. It takes them in. It keeps them." I felt the cold of the cave pressing against my skin. The humming was louder now, filling the chamber, vibrating in my chest. "Diana, you need to come with me. We need to talk to someone, a supervisor, law enforcement, someone who can help you." "Help me?" She laughed, and the sound echoed off the limestone walls. "I do not need help, Marcus. I am helping them. All of them. The ones who come here. The ones who feel the pull. The ones who hear the song. They find their way to the forest, and I guide them the rest of the way." "Guide them where?" She pointed at the far wall of the chamber. I turned and looked. There was another passage. I had not seen it before because my flashlight had not swept that direction. It was narrow, maybe 2 feet wide, and it descended steeply into darkness. The humming was coming from there, and as I watched, I saw something move in that darkness. Something that was not quite a shape. Something that shifted and flowed like smoke, like water, like nothing I had ever seen. "They go down," Diana said, "down to where the song lives, down to where the forest keeps its heart, and they become part of it. Part of the song, part of the soil, part of everything." I backed away from the passage. My flashlight beam trembled, and I realized my hands were shaking. "This is not real," I said. "This is not possible. Everything is possible here. The forest has been here for millions of years. It has seen things come and go, species, civilizations, ages of ice and ages of fire. It remembers everything, and it hungers for more, for memories, for lives, for souls." She stepped closer. I stepped back. The humming was so loud now that I could barely hear my own thoughts. "You could join them," she said. "You have been in the forest long enough to feel it. The pull, the longing, the sense that there is something just beyond the trees, waiting for you. I know you have felt it. Everyone who stays long enough feels it. I have felt nothing. That was a lie, and she knew it. I had felt it. Every ranger who worked these woods felt it eventually. The sense of being watched. The dreams of endless trees and pathways that led nowhere. The moments of disorientation when the forest seemed to shift around you, becoming something other than what it was. I had felt it, and I had ignored it, and I had told myself it was just the isolation playing tricks on my mind. "You have a choice," Diana said. "You can go back up. You can forget what you have seen. You can file your reports and maintain your trails and pretend that none of this is real. Most people do. Most people choose not to see. Or you can stay. You can go down. You can add your voice to the song and your name to the bins and become part of something that will last forever." I looked at the passage. The shape in the darkness was still there, still moving, still waiting. It had no eyes that I could see, but I felt it watching me, studying me, deciding whether I was worth taking. I made my choice. I ran. I do not remember the passage back to the surface. I do not remember climbing the ravine, or finding the trail, or making my way back to my truck. I remember fragments, running, gasping for breath, the sound of the humming fading behind me, the moment when I burst out of the trees into daylight and fell to my knees on the gravel parking lot. My hands were covered in scrapes from grabbing at rocks and roots. My pants were torn at both knees. My flashlight was gone, dropped somewhere in the darkness. I did not care. I was out. I was alive. I drove to the ranger station and sat in my truck for an hour, trying to decide what to do. I could report what I had found. I could tell someone about Diana, about the chamber, about the bins with the names of the missing. I could demand an investigation. But who would believe me? I had already been flagged for psychological issues. I had already made claims that could not be verified. If I walked in there and said that one of our naturalists was running some kind of cult that fed people to a singing presence beneath the Ozarks, I would be out of a job within the week, maybe committed, maybe worse. I decided to wait, to gather more evidence, to be smart about it. That was my first mistake. The next day, I went back to the ravine. I brought a camera, a GPS unit, and a backup flashlight. I followed the orange tape to the steel door. The door was gone. Not locked, not hidden. Gone. The rock face was solid limestone. No frame, no hinges, no sign that anything had ever been there. I ran my hands over the surface and felt nothing but cold stone. I checked the GPS coordinates 3 times. I was in the right place. The door simply did not exist anymore. I searched for 2 hours. I found nothing. No tape, no passage, no evidence. Just forest, stretching in every direction, silent and indifferent. I drove home and sat in my cabin until dark. I did not sleep that night. I kept hearing the humming in my head, kept seeing the shape in the darkness, kept feeling Diana's eyes on me like a weight. The next morning, I went to work. I filed my reports. I maintained my trails. I did not mention any of it. Diana was not at the station. I asked where she was, trying to sound casual. Another ranger said she had taken personal leave. Family emergency, no timeline for return. She never came back. A month later, her resignation was announced. She had taken a position with another agency somewhere in the Southwest. No forwarding address, no goodbye. Her desk was cleaned out within a week. Her files were transferred to storage. Her name was removed from the duty roster like she had never existed. I kept working. I kept watching. I kept collecting the orange tape whenever I found it, storing the pieces in a box under my bed next to my file of missing persons. The collection grew. 15 pieces, 20, 30, always in new locations, always tied in perfect bows. I never followed them again. In September of 2023, another hiker disappeared. Michael Chen, no relation to David Chen as far as I could tell. 23 years old, first solo backpacking trip, last seen near the Paddy Creek Wilderness. His tent was found intact. His gear was found scattered. His body was never recovered. The search lasted 5 days. I was part of it. We covered every inch of the area around his campsite, followed every trail, checked every ravine and cave entrance and hollow tree. We found nothing. On the 4th day, I found orange tape tied to a branch about half a mile from where his tent had been. I untied it and put it in my pocket without telling anyone. On the 5th day, I overheard 2 federal agents talking near the command post. They were not FBI. They did not have visible badges. They were discussing closure protocols and information containment and the phrase, acceptable loss rate. I did not hear everything, but I heard enough to know that they were not interested in finding Michael Chen. They were interested in making sure no one else went looking. I finished my shift. I went home. I added the orange tape to my collection. I updated my file. I have been doing this for 4 years now, watching, waiting, collecting evidence that no one wants to see. The disappearances continue, 1 or 2 per year, sometimes more. Always in autumn, mostly, though the pattern is not absolute. Always experienced hikers who know how to handle themselves, always attributed to accidents or animals or voluntary disappearance. The forest keeps growing, the humming keeps sounding, the song keeps calling. I do not go off trail anymore. I do not follow the orange tape. I do not look too closely at the shadows between the trees or the shapes that sometimes move in my peripheral vision. I do my job. I file my reports, and I pretend that I do not know what is happening. But I do know. And someday, when I have enough evidence, when I find someone who will believe me, when I am ready to face whatever is waiting in that chamber beneath the Ozarks, I will go back. I will find the door again, and I will finish what I started. Until then, I watch the forest, and the forest watches me. 3 weeks ago, I came home from a routine patrol and found something on my porch. A small cardboard box, no markings, no return address. I opened it and found a single item inside, a hiking boot, men's size 10, waffle tread, caked with dried mud. There was a note tucked inside the boot, written on a piece of orange survey tape in black marker. "We know you know." I looked at the boot for a long time. Then I put it in the box, put the box in my truck, and drove to the trailhead where I had parked on that October day in 2021. The lot was empty. The evening was cold. The trees were turning gold and red with the season. I walked into the forest, not far, just a few hundred yards, to a clearing I knew well, where a fallen oak had created a natural bench overlooking a small creek. I sat down and listened to the water and the wind and the distant calls of birds settling in for the night. The humming started around sunset, faint at first, then louder, then everywhere. I did not run. I did not move. I just sat there and let it wash over me, let it fill my head and my chest and my bones. It was beautiful. I had forgotten how beautiful it was. When the humming stopped, the forest was dark and I was alone. I walked back to my truck and drove home. The box with the boot was still on the passenger seat. I put it under my bed with the rest of my collection. I am writing this because I need someone to know. I am writing this because the forest is patient, but not infinitely so. I am writing this because I have started hearing the humming when I am not in the forest, when I am in my cabin, when I am driving to work, when I am lying in bed at night staring at the ceiling. I am writing this because I do not think I have much time left. If you are reading this, do not come looking for me. Do not come looking for the valley or the chamber or the thing that lives beneath the Ozarks. It is real, and it is hungry, and it has been feeding on people like us for longer than we can imagine. Stay on the marked trails. Do not follow the orange tape. Do not listen to the song. And if you ever find yourself in Mark Twain National Forest on a cool autumn evening, and the forest goes suddenly quiet, and you feel a pull towards something you cannot see, something just beyond the trees, waiting for you, turn around, walk away. Do not look back. The forest does not forgive. The forest does not forget. And the forest always gets what it wants. Last night, I dreamed of the valley. It was different than I remembered. The cabin was whole, the roof intact, smoke rising from the chimney. The grass was green instead of gold, and there were people standing in it. Dozens of people, men and women and children, all facing the cabin, all humming the same note. I walked toward them. They did not turn around. They did not acknowledge me. I moved through the crowd, brushing past shoulders and arms, feeling the vibration of their voices in my chest. The cabin door was open. Light spilled out, warm and golden. I stepped inside. Diana was there. She was sitting at a wooden table, hands folded in front of her, smiling that terrible smile. "Welcome home," she said. I woke up with the humming still in my ears. It has not stopped since. This morning, I found orange tape tied to the handle of my front door. I did not untie it. I left it there. I know what it means. They are not waiting anymore. They are coming for me. And part of me, the part that has been listening to the song for 4 years, the part that felt the pull on that first night in the valley, the part that never really left that chamber beneath the earth, that part of me wants to let them. I have one more thing to do before I go. One more piece of evidence to add to the file. One more name to write down. Marcus Cole, Autumn, 2025. Mark Twain National Forest. The humming is louder now. I can feel it in my bones. I can hear it calling my name. I am going to answer. If you find this, remember what I told you. Stay on the marked trails. Do not follow the orange tape. Do not listen to the song. And whatever you do, do not go looking for the valley. It is not empty. It never was. The forest is waiting. And the forest always wins. I put down the pen and looked at what I had written. 23 pages, 11,000 words. Everything I knew, everything I had seen, everything I had collected over 4 years of watching and waiting and pretending not to understand. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. A record. A warning. A message in a bottle thrown into an ocean that might never bring it to shore. I sealed the pages in an envelope and addressed it to the one person I thought might believe me. A journalist in St. Louis who had written about unexplained disappearances in national parks. Her articles were buried in the back pages, dismissed by mainstream outlets, but she kept digging. She kept asking questions. She was the only one who might understand. I drove to the post office and mailed the envelope. Then I drove back to my cabin and sat on the porch and watched the sun go down over the trees. The humming started before the last light faded. It came from the forest, from the earth, from the sky. It filled the clearing around my cabin and pressed against the walls and windows. It found the cracks in my defenses and slipped through, whispering promises I had heard before. Peace, adventure, escape. The forest gives you what you are looking for. I stood up and walked to the edge of the porch. The trees were dark silhouettes against the fading sky. Something moved between them. Not an animal, not a person. Something else. I stepped off the porch and walked toward it. The humming grew louder. The shape grew clearer. I could see it now. The thing I had glimpsed in the chamber. The thing that lived beneath the Ozarks. The thing that had been calling to me since that first night in the valley. It was beautiful. It was terrible. It was everything I had ever feared and everything I had ever wanted. I reached out my hand. The forest reached back. And then there was only the song. I need to correct something. I am still here. I am still writing. The moment I described did not happen. Not yet. It is a future I can see clearly. A future that feels as real as the present. A future that is waiting for me at the edge of the trees. But I am not there yet. I am sitting in my cabin, pen in hand, and the humming has stopped. The forest is quiet. The night is cold and clear, and I can see stars through my window. I do not know why I wrote that. I do not know why I can see what is coming so clearly. Maybe the song has already started to change me. Maybe I am closer to the edge than I realized. But I am not over it yet. I am going to mail this letter. I am going to finish my report. I am going to add one more piece of evidence to the file. And then I am going to do something I should have done 4 years ago. I am going to fight back. I do not know how. I do not know if it is possible. The forest has been here for millions of years, and I am one man with a flashlight and a multi-tool and a head full of questions that might never be answered. But I am not going to go quietly. I am not going to walk into the trees and let the song take me. I am not going to become another name on a storage bin in a chamber beneath the earth. I am going to find the door again. I am going to go back down. I am going to look the thing in the darkness in whatever passes for its face, and I am going to ask it why. Why us? Why this forest? Why these lives? Maybe it will kill me. Probably it will kill me. But at least I will know. At least I will understand. The humming is starting again. Faint, distant, like an echo of an echo. It is calling me. It has been calling me for 4 years. This time, I am going to answer on my own terms. Wish me luck. I will need it. The last entry in my journal is dated 3 days ago. I do not remember writing it. I do not remember the 3 days between then and now. I woke up this morning in my cabin, fully dressed, boots still on my feet, mud on my pants and jacket. My hands are covered in scratches. My flashlight is missing. There is a piece of orange tape tied around my left wrist in a neat bow. I do not know what happened. I do not know where I went or what I did or what I found. But I know this. I am still here. I am still alive. And the humming has stopped. My name is Evan Miller. I'm 26 years old. In the summer of 2019, I was studying civil engineering at the University of Denver. I was going through a stressful period because of the internship I had started, and I was spending long hours in the office and workshops. At that time, I had 3 close friends, Dylan Carter, Lauren Hayes, and Connor Reed. We had been friends since our freshman year of college, and we went out together most weekends. In August, Dylan suggested we go camping for 2 days in a remote area near Bakersfield, California. He said he had found a place that offered free camping in open land near low hills, away from busy roads. He wanted to get away from everything. Lauren agreed immediately, and Connor didn't say anything. As for me, I was hesitant, but everyone insisted, and I was afraid of appearing to refuse for no reason. On Friday morning, we set off in Dylan's gray Toyota Tacoma pickup truck. We put boxes of food, tents, and equipment in the back. The trip was long, about 3.5 hours. The road was quiet, and the place we were going to wasn't officially registered as a campsite, but it was known among some local hikers. We arrived a little before noon. The area was very wide, a barren stretch of land dotted with some dry shrubs. Further on, there were small, rocky hills. There was no infrastructure, no water, no restrooms, just completely open space. We found a relatively flat spot near a group of rocks, and Dylan decided this was the right place. The sun was hot, but the air was dry. We pitched 4 tents haphazardly around the truck, not evenly spaced or parallel. My tent was about 10 meters from Lauren's. We put up a small folding table and rested for a while. We spent the rest of the day hiking and talking about university and what awaited us after graduation. We laughed and played some games. The weather was normal, nothing out of the ordinary. As evening fell, we lit a fire and prepared a simple meal. We didn't hear any human voices, nor did we see any cars except ours. The place was completely empty. Around 10 o'clock, I started to feel sleepy. I told everyone I was going to sleep and went to my tent. The wind was light and the sky was clear. Usually, when my brother wakes up several times during the night because of any noise, it's a habit he's had for a long time. I put my head on the pillow and began to relax. I heard my friends talking quietly outside. After a few minutes, the talking stopped. Perhaps they had also gone to sleep. The last thing I remember before I drifted off was the sound of the wind passing over the roof of the tent. I woke up at dawn. There was no apparent reason for waking me. I looked at my watch and saw it was 5:05. I went outside the tent, and as soon as I stepped out, I felt something strange. At first, I didn't understand what it was. The ground looked different. The tents weren't in the same positions as when we had left them. I took a step closer, then another, and stood motionless. I didn't breathe for a full few seconds. The 4 tents were arranged precisely and in a certain way, a perfectly square geometric pattern, each tent at a corner, the distances perfectly equal. Someone had used a measuring tape. My tent was no longer in its original spot. It had been moved from its old position by a distance I estimated at 15 meters. The same was true for the others. In the center of this square, a small pile of stones had been placed, 4 layers on top of each other in a regular, not random arrangement. Someone had deliberately placed it as a marker. I stood staring, bewildered. I felt a heat in my chest. My mind refused to accept the sight. At first, I was certain that none of us had done this, and I knew I always woke up during the night, especially in a place like this. Yet, I heard nothing, felt no movement. I walked towards Connor's tent and unzipped it. I found him asleep and woke him quickly. He looked around, confused. I said, "Connor, do you see what I see?" He came out, and as soon as he saw the area, his eyes widened. He didn't say anything at first. We went to Lauren's tent and found her awake, sitting inside. She seemed agitated. She said she had heard strange noises in her sleep, but couldn't identify them. Dylan was the last to wake up. When he went outside and saw the square, he asked, "Who did this?" No one answered. The 4 of us stood in the middle of the space. A strange silence enveloped us, a silence I'd never experienced before. Even the wind had slowed down. Strangely, everything inside the tents was exactly as it had been. The bags in their place, the shoes neatly arranged, the phones on the small tables. Nothing had disappeared. Nothing had changed. But the ground around the tents revealed the truth. There were clear marks on the dirt where the tents had been dragged, signs that the tent had been pulled across the ground for a distance and then lifted, because the marks would suddenly disappear before reappearing near their new location. Dylan said in a low voice, "No one person could have carried these tents alone and placed them in this arrangement. This was the work of several people." Connor stood silently. Lauren put her hand over her mouth. I felt my legs become heavy. I didn't know what we should have done. I tried to find an explanation, but there was no logical one other than that a group of people had approached while we were sleeping, and none of us had noticed them. I said in a wavering voice, "Did anyone see anything? Any sound? Any movement?" Everyone shook their heads. Nothing. The strangest thing was that Lauren and Dylan said they both had strange dreams at night. Lauren said she saw people walking in a line and a number of steps repeatedly, and someone was forcing her to follow a certain rhythm. Dylan said he had a dream in which he was sitting in an empty room and heard the sound of approaching footsteps, but he could not see who was approaching. I didn't believe in dreams or symbols, but the idea that two of my friends had seen the same nighttime pattern was disturbing. Connor said he felt that he wasn't sleeping alone. There was someone standing behind his tent, but he wasn't sure. We all tried to look at the pile of stones in the middle. There was nothing special about it, but the shape was unusually neat. The stones of the place were not arranged in this way. Someone gathered them and carefully placed them so that they would sit on top of each other without falling over. Dylan said this wasn't a joke from random people. It was intentional, deliberate, and calm, indicating that they had been close to us all night. We didn't want to believe it. We all tried to deny it about ourselves in different ways. Lauren said, "Maybe people came in the night and didn't want to hurt us." Connor said maybe we were fast asleep, but all these theories were weak. We started thinking about leaving immediately. The place was making me feel uneasy, and if people were approaching us at night in such an organized way, it made sense that they were also watching us. As we were getting ready to leave, Dylan stepped into the middle of the square and picked up the pile of stones. As soon as the stones hit the ground, we all heard a distant sound, like stones rubbing against each other, like something heavy being dragged. The sound was coming from the direction of the rocky hills. We all stopped moving and looked at each other. Lauren said, "What was that?" Connor said, "It's not an echo. The sound is different, like something moving slowly." Dylan, who was standing in the middle with a stone in his hand, said, "I didn't do anything, I just dropped it." The sound repeated itself, getting closer. It wasn't the howl of an animal. It wasn't the sound of wind. It was something human or artificial. I felt my whole body tense up. Lauren said, "We have to leave now." Connor agreed immediately. Dylan stood still for a few seconds, then started gathering his things. As for me, I felt my heart beating fast. I was trying to understand, but nothing made sense. We gathered our things. We moved at breakneck speed. We hadn't fully dismantled the tents. Dylan had thrown them into the trunk of the car as they were. We didn't talk much. We were moving instinctively. The distant sound of stones echoed for the third time, but this time it was like a body being dragged on the ground, a frictional sound rising and falling. Lauren started to cry. Connor kept turning around every 2 seconds. Dylan said, "Get in, get in." We got in the car, and Dylan sped off at an unusual speed on a dirt road unsuited for speed. The car shook, and we almost overturned twice. I felt the air inside the car was heavy. Dylan was breathing rapidly. We didn't exchange glances. Each of us was looking at something different outside, searching for human movement among the rocks or behind the hills. In the middle of the road, Dylan asked, "Did anyone see anything there before we left?" Nothing. The truth is, no one saw anyone. No one heard footsteps. No one saw a light in the darkness. But the arrangement of the tents, the trails of clouds, the similar dreams, and the sound of stones all confirmed that people had been around us during the night. We drove to the asphalt road, and after about 20 minutes, Dylan stopped at a gas station. We sat in the car, panting. Connor and I went out to buy water. Our hands were shaking. When we got back in the car, Lauren was sitting silently, looking at the ground. No one said anything on the way back to Denver. We didn't talk. Each of us was thinking about what had happened in our own way. When we arrived in the city, we each went to our own houses. We didn't hug each other. We didn't talk about the camp. A week passed, then a month, then a year. We weren't the friends we used to be. Dylan moved to another state. Lauren dropped out of college after a year. Connor became more withdrawn. I tried to ignore everything that happened, but the scene is still vivid in my mind. The tents arranged meticulously, the pile of rocks in the middle, and the trails of clouds on the ground. This wasn't spontaneous. It was intentional, perhaps part of a plan we didn't understand. 5 years later, we haven't discussed what happened again. Each of us has lived our lives in our own way. We haven't tried to explain it. I haven't gone on a camping trip since then. I can't sleep outdoors after that night. The only thing that doesn't leave my mind is that everything that happened was completely silent. People approached us, pulled up entire tents, arranged the square, built the pile of stones, and moved in a strange, orderly fashion, all without us wailing or hearing a single sound. Worse still, they left no message, no trace of their intentions. They didn't try to take anything. They didn't try to hurt anyone. But they wanted us to know they were there, that they were watching. I'm sure what happened wasn't random. It was human, and they were closer than we imagined. I never should have taken the assignment in Brazil. 23 years as a ranger in Yellowstone should have taught me to trust my gut, and my gut was screaming at me from the moment I stepped off that cramped plane in Manaus. But the International Forest Service Exchange Program was offering triple hazard pay for experienced rangers willing to assist with the investigation, and after my divorce, I needed the money. Besides, how different could one forest be from another? Trees are trees, I told myself. Wildlife is wildlife. I had tracked grizzlies through blizzards and found lost hikers in complete whiteouts. The Amazon would be just another wilderness, just with more humidity. I was wrong. God help me, I was so wrong. My name is Jack Morrison, and what I'm about to tell you is the truth, though I doubt many will believe it. The Brazilian authorities have sealed the official reports. The U.S. State Department has classified my debriefing, and the families of the missing have been fed sanitized lies about tragic accidents and equipment failures. But people deserve to know what really happened to Patrol Unit 7 in the Javari Valley Reserve, and why an entire section of the Amazon rainforest has been quietly designated as a permanent exclusion zone. It started with a simple missing persons case. A routine patrol of Brazilian forest guards had vanished without a trace deep in the western Amazon, near the Peruvian border. 5 experienced men, well-equipped and familiar with the terrain, had simply failed to return from a standard 2-week survey mission. Their last radio contact had been perfectly normal, just a check-in confirming their position and stating they were investigating some unusual tree damage in Sector 47. That was 17 days ago when I arrived. The Brazilian authorities had already sent 2 search parties. The first had found the patrol's base camp abandoned but intact, with no signs of struggle or disturbance. Food supplies were untouched, sleeping bags still rolled out as if the men had simply stood up in the middle of the night and walked away. The second search party had followed what they believed were tracks deeper into the jungle, but they had turned back after their electronic equipment began malfunctioning and 3 of their team members reported experiencing severe disorientation and hallucinations. That's when they called in international assistance. The Brazilians wanted experienced wilderness search and rescue personnel who weren't familiar with local superstitions and wouldn't be spooked by indigenous folklore about the area. They got me, along with 2 other American rangers, Sarah Chen from Olympic National Park and Mike Torres from the Everglades, plus a Canadian tracker named David Whitehorse who'd worked extensively in the boreal forests. Our Brazilian liaison was Captain Eduardo Silva, a competent-looking man in his 40s with prematurely gray hair and eyes that never seemed to stop moving, constantly scanning the jungle around us as if he expected something to leap out at any moment. He met us at the makeshift command post they'd established at the edge of the exclusion area, a collection of military tents and communication equipment that looked woefully inadequate against the wall of green that rose up behind it. The heat hit you like a physical force, thick and oppressive, carrying the smell of rotting vegetation and something else, something sweet and cloying that stuck in the back of your throat. The jungle wasn't like any forest I'd known. It was alive in a way that felt almost malevolent. Millions of insects creating a constant high-pitched whine that drilled into your skull, punctuated by the shrieks and calls of hidden creatures. The canopy above was so dense that even at midday, we operated in a green twilight that made it impossible to judge time or distance accurately. Silva briefed us on the situation while we checked our equipment. The missing patrol had been investigating reports of illegal logging activity, but they'd found something else instead. The tree damage they'd mentioned in their last transmission wasn't from chainsaws or heavy equipment. According to the first search party's reports, entire sections of forest had been stripped of bark in perfect spirals. Some trees reaching over 100 feet tall, completely denuded in patterns that would have taken enormous effort and sophisticated equipment to achieve. Yet there were no tracks, no signs of machinery, no evidence of human presence at all except for the patrol's abandoned camp. Sarah was the first to voice what we were all thinking. She asked Silva directly what the local indigenous tribes said about the area. He hesitated before answering, and when he did, his voice was carefully neutral. The nearest villages had been abandoned for generations, he said. The Karubo and Matis peoples who traditionally inhabited the region had stories about this particular section of forest, stories that predated European contact. They called it the place where the earth swallows men whole, where the trees themselves could move and hunt, where time flowed differently and the barriers between worlds grew thin. Mike laughed at that, making some joke about native superstitions, but I noticed he kept his hand on his sidearm as he did. Whitehorse said nothing, just studied the satellite photos of the area with an expression I couldn't read. For my part, I focused on the practical details. We would leave at dawn, follow the same route as the missing patrol, and operate on a strict timeline. If we found nothing within 72 hours, we would return and recommend the area be permanently sealed off. That night, I couldn't sleep. The jungle pressed in around our camp, and every sound seemed amplified in the darkness. I lay in my tent, listening to something large moving through the underbrush just beyond our perimeter lights, circling us slowly and deliberately. Whatever it was never came close enough to trigger the motion sensors, but I could feel it out there, watching and waiting. When I finally dozed off just before dawn, I dreamed of trees walking on root legs, their branches reaching down like grasping fingers, and of men's voices calling for help from inside solid wood. We set out at first light, Silva leading with Whitehorse, then Sarah and Mike, with me taking rear guard. The trail the patrol had followed was still visible, their machete marks on the vegetation already beginning to heal over in the explosive growth of the rainforest. Within an hour, we were deep enough that the command post's radio signals began to break up, the static taking on an almost organic quality, like breathing mixed with whispers. The first strange thing we encountered was the silence. As we pushed deeper into the forest, following the increasingly overgrown trail, the constant background noise of insects and birds gradually faded away until we were walking through an oppressive quiet broken only by our own footsteps and breathing. It was as if we'd crossed some invisible boundary into a zone where normal life refused to venture. The second strange thing was the trees themselves. Silva stopped us at a clearing where several massive trees, each one probably centuries old, showed the spiral scarring the first search party had reported. The bark had been removed in perfect mathematical spirals, following the Fibonacci sequence with a precision that would be difficult to achieve even with modern tools. The exposed wood underneath was smooth as glass and gave off that same sweet, cloying smell I'd noticed at the command post, but stronger now, strong enough to make your eyes water. Whitehorse approached one of the trees and placed his hand on the exposed wood, then jerked it back immediately. He said the tree felt warm, almost body temperature, and that he could swear he'd felt a pulse beneath the surface. Mike called him crazy, but when Sarah checked with the thermal imaging equipment, she confirmed that the stripped trees were running about 15 degrees warmer than the surrounding forest, with heat signatures that fluctuated in patterns that looked almost like circulation. We found the patrol's camp just after midday, exactly as the first search party had described it. 5 tents arranged in a defensive circle, equipment laid out neatly, no signs of struggle or panic. The digital logs were still functioning on battery power, the last entry made at 0300 hours on the night they disappeared, simply noting that Private Mendoza was taking over watch duty from Corporal Santos. Nothing after that. I examined each tent carefully while the others secured the perimeter. In the command tent, I found something the first search party had missed, a personal notebook tucked inside a sleeping bag. It belonged to Lieutenant Reyes, the patrol leader, and the final entries made my blood run cold. He described hearing voices calling from the forest, voices that sounded exactly like his men, even when all his men were accounted for and standing right next to him. He wrote about dreams where the trees were hollow and filled with people, generations of people who'd been absorbed into the wood, still conscious, but unable to move or speak, except when the wind blew through the branches just right. The last entry, scrawled in increasingly erratic handwriting, simply said, "They're not trees. They were never trees. We're inside something's garden, and it's time for harvest." Sarah called out from the edge of camp, her voice tight with tension. She'd found tracks leading away from camp, but they weren't normal footprints. The impressions in the soft soil looked like human feet, but stretched and distorted, as if the men had been walking on their toes with their heels raised impossibly high. The stride length was wrong too, nearly twice what it should be for men of average height. The tracks led deeper into the forest, toward an area where the canopy grew so thick that our GPS units showed only blank spaces, a dead zone in the middle of map territory. We followed the tracks for 3 hours, the forest growing stranger with each step. Trees began to appear that shouldn't exist, their trunks twisted into impossible angles, their branches forming geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. The air grew thicker, more oppressive, and that sweet smell became overwhelming. Mike started complaining of headaches, and Sarah reported that her equipment was showing impossible readings, detecting heat signatures that appeared and disappeared at random, sometimes seeming to come from inside the trees themselves. It was Whitehorse who spotted the first body, though body isn't really the right word for what we found. 30 feet up in a tree, partially embedded in the trunk, was what had once been a man. The wood had grown around him, or through him, branches emerging from his chest and throat, his face barely visible through a mask of bark. His eyes were gone, replaced by small white flowers that tracked our movement with an awareness that made my skin crawl. Silva identified him as Corporal Santos from the missing patrol, though how he could tell from what remained, I didn't want to know. We found the others within a 100-yard radius, each one in various stages of absorption into the trees. Private Mendoza was the most recent, his lower body still free, though roots had already begun to wrap around his legs and burrow into his flesh. When Mike approached to check for signs of life, Mendoza's mouth opened, and though no sound came out, we could see his lips forming the word "run" over and over again. That's when the forest began to move. It started slowly, subtly, branches swaying without wind, roots shifting beneath the earth. The trees around us began to lean inward, their canopies closing like a dome. The sweet smell intensified until it was almost suffocating, and I realized with horrible clarity what it was. Pheromones, digestive pheromones. The entire section of forest was a single organism, and we were standing in its stomach. Sarah's equipment went haywire, lights flashing, alarms screaming. She shouted that she was detecting massive electromagnetic activity, patterns that suggested neural activity, but on a scale that shouldn't be possible. The trees weren't just moving randomly, they were coordinating, thinking, planning. We were dealing with something that had intelligence, perhaps had always had intelligence, something that had been feeding on humans and animals for God knows how long. The attack came from above and below simultaneously. Branches whipped down like striking snakes while roots erupted from the earth, both covered in thorns that glistened with some kind of secretion. Mike got hit first, thorns raking across his arm, and within seconds he was screaming, clawing at his skin as whatever toxin they carried began to work. His arm started to change color, the flesh taking on a greenish tinge, and I could see something moving under his skin, spreading from the wound sites like underground roots. We ran. There was no strategy, no organized retreat, just pure panicked flight through a forest that was actively trying to kill us. Trees moved to block our path, roots tried to trip us, and overhead, the canopy rustled with movement that was definitely not wind. Behind us, Mike's screams had stopped, replaced by a sound that might have been laughter, or might have been something else entirely, something that no human throat should be able to produce. Silva saved us. The man I'd initially written off as just another bureaucrat turned out to have depths I hadn't expected. He pulled out an emergency flare and shot it directly into the canopy above us. The phosphorus burned white hot, and the trees recoiled from it with a sound like a million voices screaming in unison. The path ahead cleared for just a moment, and we took it, sprinting through gaps that closed seconds after we passed. But the forest wasn't done with us. As we ran, I began to notice that the landscape wasn't staying consistent. Landmarks we'd passed on the way in appeared in the wrong places or didn't appear at all. The trail we'd followed had vanished completely, replaced by virgin forest that looked like it had never seen human passage. Time itself seemed to be fluctuating. My watch showed that we'd been running for 10 minutes, but the sun had moved across the sky as if hours had passed. Sarah stumbled and fell, and when I helped her up, I saw that the thorn scratches on her hands were already beginning to show the same greenish discoloration that had taken Mike. She looked at me with terrified eyes and said something that chilled me more than everything else we'd seen. She said she could feel it in her head, the forest, that it was showing her things, images of all the people it had absorbed over centuries, maybe millennia. They weren't dead, not exactly. They were part of it now. Their consciousness dissolved and distributed through the root network, aware but unable to do anything but exist as part of the greater whole. Whitehorse was the one who figured out how to navigate. He noticed that the older trees, the ones that predated the organism or existed at its edges, still followed normal patterns. By keeping these on our left and moving consistently away from the areas of greatest distortion, we slowly made our way back toward normal forest. But the thing wasn't letting us go easily. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the canopy, we heard voices calling to us from the darkness. They were perfect mimics of Mike's voice, of the missing patrol members, even of our own voices, calling for help, begging us to come back, promising that it didn't hurt, that becoming part of the forest was actually beautiful. The worst part was when they used the voice of my daughter. I hadn't told anyone about Emma, about how she died in a car accident 3 years ago, but somehow it knew. Her voice echoed through the trees, young and scared, calling for Daddy, saying she was lost and couldn't find her way home. It took every ounce of willpower I had not to turn back, and I saw Silva physically restraining Whitehorse from running toward a voice that sounded like his deceased wife. We reached the edge of the organism's territory just as full darkness fell. The transition was jarring, like stepping out of a nightmare into reality. One moment we were in that twisted, living forest, and the next we were in normal jungle, with normal sounds and normal trees that didn't pulse with alien life. But we didn't stop running until we could see the lights of the command post, until we were surrounded by other people and electric lights and the familiar chaos of human activity. The medical team sedated Sarah immediately, but it was too late. Over the next 12 hours, we watched her transformation accelerate. The greenish discoloration spread from the wound sites, her skin taking on a bark-like texture. Small shoots began to emerge from her pores, and her hair fell out, replaced by thin branches with tiny leaves. She was conscious through most of it, whispering about the things she could see through the forest's collective consciousness, about the ancient intelligence that had taken root in this part of the Amazon long before humans walked upright. She died, or transformed completely, just before dawn. Where Sarah Chen had been, there was now a small tree, perfectly formed but wrong in every way that mattered. When they tried to take samples, the tree's sap turned out to have the same DNA markers as Sarah's blood. She had become part of it, even separated from the main organism. The Brazilian government had the tree burned immediately, but I sometimes wonder if that was enough, if spores or seeds or whatever that thing used to reproduce might have already spread. Silva's report was classified immediately, and we were all required to sign documents that essentially erased the entire event from official record. The cover story was a virulent fungal infection, something that could explain the deaths without raising too many questions. The families were told their loved ones had died heroically trying to stop illegal logging operations. Mike Torres was listed as killed in action, body unrecoverable. The missing patrol suffered the same fate in the official records. But I know the truth. That section of the Amazon isn't just forest. It's a living entity, ancient and patient, that has learned to mimic its surroundings perfectly. It feeds on whatever wanders into its domain, absorbing not just flesh and blood, but consciousness itself, adding every victim's knowledge and memories to its collective intelligence and its learning. Each person it absorbs makes it smarter, more aware of the world beyond its borders. The Brazilian government has established a 50-square-kilometer exclusion zone around the area, with armed patrols and satellite surveillance to ensure no one enters. They've told the local indigenous peoples, who simply nodded as if they'd always known this day would come. But I don't think it's enough. In my dreams, I still hear Sarah's voice describing what she saw through the forest's consciousness, how it was just one node in a network that spans continents, connected through root systems and fungal networks we don't fully understand. Whitehorse disappeared a month after we returned to the States. The official story is that he had a breakdown and went off the grid, but I know better. The last time I spoke to him, he told me he'd been having dreams about the forest, that it was calling to him, showing him things. He said he could feel something growing inside him, something that the medical tests hadn't caught. He was going back, he said, not to the Amazon necessarily, but to forests in general. He needed to know if what we'd encountered was unique or if there were others, sleeping giants hidden in plain sight in wilderness areas around the world. I retired from the Forest Service after that. Officially, it was due to PTSD from a traumatic rescue operation. Unofficially, I couldn't stand being in forests anymore. Every tree looked suspicious. Every unusual growth pattern seemed sinister. I moved to Phoenix, about as far from significant forest coverage as I could get in the continental U.S. But even here, in the middle of the desert, I sometimes wake up at night to the sound of branches scraping against my window, even though there are no trees in my yard. The worst part is the uncertainty. Not knowing how far it spreads, how many of these things might be out there, hidden in the world's remaining wilderness areas. The Amazon alone has vast unexplored regions. What else might be lurking there? What other impossible organisms have evolved in isolation, developing abilities that challenge our understanding of biology and consciousness itself? I've been contacted by others since then, people who've had similar experiences in different forests around the world. A park ranger from the Black Forest in Germany who described trees that moved when no one was looking. A conservation officer from the Congo who found an entire village that had been absorbed into the forest overnight, the buildings covered in vegetation that shouldn't have been able to grow that fast. A researcher from Tasmania who claimed to have recorded tree communications that resembled neural activity patterns. We've formed an informal network, sharing information and trying to map potential sites. But we're fighting against official denial and public disbelief. No one wants to accept that vast sections of our planet's forests might be something other than what they appear. The environmental movement certainly doesn't want to hear that some wilderness areas need to be feared rather than preserved, and the governments of the world seem content to quietly contain these incidents rather than acknowledge a threat they don't understand and can't control. But the evidence keeps mounting. Disappearances in national parks that follow similar patterns. Sections of forest that satellites show as dead zones where no electronic equipment functions properly. Indigenous peoples around the world with remarkably similar legends about trees that walk and forests that hunger. And always, that sweet smell that anyone who's encountered these things describes. The smell of something ancient and patient and utterly alien. I'm writing this down because people need to know. Not to cause panic, but to promote caution. If you're hiking or camping and you notice the forest go completely silent, turn back. If you see trees with spiral patterns stripped into their bark, leave immediately. If you smell something sweet and cloying that makes your head swim, run and don't stop until you're back in civilization. And if you hear voices calling from the forest, especially voices of people you know shouldn't be there, ignore them no matter how real they sound. The official reports may be sealed, the evidence may be destroyed or classified, but the truth has a way of surfacing. That thing in the Amazon is still there, still growing, still learning. Every person it absorbs makes it more intelligent, more aware of our world and how to navigate it. And if Whitehorse's theories were correct, if these organisms are connected somehow, then they're sharing information, learning from each encounter, evolving their hunting strategies. I think about Mike Torres sometimes, wondering if any part of his consciousness still exists within that thing. Is he aware, trapped in a nightmare of absorption and distribution across an alien nervous system? Or has his sense of self completely dissolved, his thoughts and memories just data points in a vast, incomprehensible intelligence? The not knowing is almost worse than either possibility. The dreams have been getting worse lately. Not nightmares exactly, but visions of forests spreading, of cities being slowly engulfed by green that moves with purpose and intent. I see root systems extending beneath urban areas, waiting for some signal to emerge and claim what they consider theirs. I see people walking into forests and never walking out, their disappearances explained away as accidents or voluntary disappearances. I see Sarah Chen's face in every tree, her eyes replaced by those white flowers that track movement with impossible awareness. Last week, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a small branch, perfectly ordinary looking except for the spiral pattern carved into its bark. When I touched it, I felt that same warmth Whitehorse had described, that sense of something pulsing just beneath the surface. I burned it immediately, but the smell lingered in my house for days, that sweet, cloying scent that haunts my dreams. I've started to notice things here in Phoenix that disturb me. Small things, easily dismissed. A tree in the local park that wasn't there last month. Plants in my neighbor's garden that seem to move when no one's looking. A pattern of missing persons that, when mapped, forms a rough circle around certain wilderness areas. Maybe I'm paranoid. Maybe the trauma has left me seeing patterns that aren't there. But maybe not. The indigenous peoples of the Amazon had the right idea. They knew to avoid certain areas, to respect boundaries that weren't meant to be crossed. We modern humans, with our satellites and GPS and scientific certainty, we've forgotten that there are things in this world that predate us, that will outlast us, that see us not as the dominant species, but as convenient sources of nutrients and information. I'm not saying don't go into forests. I'm not advocating for the destruction of wilderness areas. But I am saying be careful. Pay attention to the warning signs. Trust your instincts when they tell you something's wrong. And if you ever find yourself in a section of forest where the trees themselves seem to be watching you, where the silence is too complete and the air smells too sweet, remember what happened to Patrol Unit 7 and get out while you still can, because the forest is patient. It's been here long before us, and it will be here long after. It doesn't need to chase us. It just needs to wait for us to wander into its domain, drawn by curiosity or duty or simple bad luck. And once you're inside, once you've breathed in those pheromones and felt the ground shift beneath your feet, it's already too late. You're part of the garden now, and gardens are meant to be harvested. I've made provisions for this account to be released if something happens to me. The compulsion to return has been growing stronger lately, a pull I can't fully explain. Sometimes I catch myself looking at flights to Brazil or researching hiking trails in remote forests. The rational part of my mind knows this is the organism's influence, some residual effect from our exposure, but that knowledge doesn't make the urge any less powerful. If I disappear, if I'm reported missing or found dead under mysterious circumstances, know that it wasn't voluntary. Know that something called me back and I couldn't resist anymore. And know that these things are real. They're spreading and they're learning. Every person who vanishes into the wilderness might not be lost or injured or deliberately going off grid. They might be nutrition for something that shouldn't exist, their consciousness absorbed into an alien intelligence that grows stronger with each victim. The forest ranger's oath includes a promise to protect the wilderness and those who visit it. I've spent my career honoring that oath, but now I understand that sometimes the wilderness doesn't need our protection. Sometimes we need protection from it. There are places on this earth that human beings were never meant to go. Ecosystems that have evolved beyond our understanding. Organisms that challenge everything we think we know about life and consciousness. The Javari Valley Reserve is one of those places. That section of the Amazon isn't just forest anymore, if it ever was. It's something else, something that wears the appearance of forest like camouflage, hiding its true nature until it's too late. The Brazilian government knows this. Certain military officials know this, and now you know this. What you do with that knowledge is up to you. But if you value your life, if you value your humanity, if you value the boundary between human consciousness and something utterly alien, you'll stay away from the places where the trees grow in impossible patterns and the forest itself seems to breathe. You'll ignore the voices that call from the darkness, no matter how familiar they sound, and you'll remember that in some parts of this world, we're not the apex predator, we're prey. My name is Jack Morrison. I was a forest ranger for 23 years. I've seen things that shouldn't exist and survived an encounter that killed better people than me. This is my testimony, my warning, my confession. The forest is hungry, and it's learned our voices. Don't let it learn yours. The investigation into the Javari Valley incident has been officially closed, the area permanently restricted, the evidence sealed away in classified archives that will probably never see daylight. But the organism is still there, still growing, still waiting. And sometimes, late at night when the desert wind blows just right, I swear I can smell it on the breeze, that sweet cloying scent that means the forest is thinking of me, calling me back to become part of something larger, older, and infinitely more patient than humanity could ever be. I've left copies of this account with trusted individuals, along with instructions to release it if certain conditions are met. If multiple wilderness disappearances occur in a pattern. If sections of forest suddenly become electronic dead zones. If trees start showing those spiral patterns in new locations. The people deserve to know what they're facing, even if the governments of the world prefer comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. There's one last thing I need to document, something I've been reluctant to write down because it sounds insane even after everything else. During our escape, in those moments when the forest was actively hunting us, I experienced something beyond normal perception. For just an instant, I could feel its consciousness, vast and distributed and completely alien. But within that alienness, I sensed something familiar, patterns that resembled human thought but distorted and multiplied beyond recognition. I think the organism collects more than just physical matter and memories. I think it collects souls, consciousness, the essential spark that makes us human. And I think those souls remain aware, trapped in an existence that's neither life nor death, dissolved into something greater but unable to fully merge with it. They exist in the spaces between thoughts, in the pauses between heartbeats of a creature whose heart is made of wood and whose blood is chlorophyll. The indigenous peoples who abandoned those villages generations ago knew what we've only recently discovered. They knew that some battles can't be won, only avoided. They knew that the forest could think and plan and hunger in ways that mere animals never could. They knew that once it tasted human consciousness, it would never stop craving more. And they knew that the only survival strategy was complete avoidance, to pretend those sections of forest simply didn't exist and hope the organism would be content with its territory. But we've broken that unspoken treaty. We've penetrated its domain with our technology and our arrogance, and now it knows we're here. It knows how many of us there are, where we live, how we think. Every person it's absorbed has added to its understanding of human civilization, and I fear we've crossed some critical threshold. The organism isn't content to wait anymore. It's reaching out, spreading its influence through spores and pheromones and God knows what else. The increase in forest-related disappearances worldwide isn't a coincidence. The reports of trees appearing overnight in urban areas isn't mass hysteria. The dreams that countless people are having about forests that think and breathe and hunger, those aren't just trauma responses. Something is happening, something on a scale we're not prepared to comprehend or confront. And at the heart of it all is that thing in the Amazon, the network's oldest and most powerful node, the template from which all the others are growing. I've done the math. At the current rate of expansion, assuming exponential growth as the organism learns and adapts, significant portions of the world's forests could be compromised within a decade, not destroyed or replaced, but transformed into something that looks like forest but isn't, something that waits with infinite patience for people to wander into its web. The environmental protection movements, in their zeal to preserve wilderness areas, might actually be protecting humanity's greatest predator. There's no way to fight something like this, not with conventional methods. Fire only works temporarily. The organism regenerates from root systems that go deeper than we can burn. Chemical defoliants might slow it down, but would destroy legitimate ecosystems in the process. Nuclear options are obviously off the table. Our only defense is knowledge and avoidance, to map the infected areas and quarantine them completely. But that requires acknowledgement from world governments that something this impossible exists, and that acknowledgement isn't coming. So I'm left with this testimony, this warning cry into the dark that may or may not be heard. Every night I check the news for reports of unusual disappearances, for stories about forests behaving strangely, for any sign that others are beginning to see the pattern. And every night I find more evidence that the organism is spreading, adapting, learning. It's patient because it knows time is on its side. It's been here for millions of years. What's another century or two? But for us, for humanity, time is running out. Each person who disappears into those infected forests adds to its knowledge base. Each encounter teaches it more about our weaknesses, our blind spots, our psychology. It's studying us the way we study lab rats, with the same dispassionate curiosity and the same ultimate intention. We're not fellow inhabitants of Earth to this thing. We're resources to be harvested, consciousness to be absorbed, nutrients to be processed. I think about Lieutenant Reyes's final journal entry often. They're not trees. They were never trees. We're inside something's garden, and it's time for harvest. He understood in those final moments what we were really facing. Not just a predatory organism, but something that farmed, that cultivated, that had been preparing its crop for longer than human civilization has existed. And now, as our population expands and pushes deeper into wilderness areas, we're walking right into the harvest zone. The optimist in me wants to believe that knowledge and caution will be enough, that we can coexist with this thing if we just respect its boundaries and stay away from infected areas. But the realist knows better. The organism isn't going to be content with the territory it has. It's going to spread, slowly but inevitably, until there's nowhere left to run. And then humanity will face a choice: adaptation or absorption. Some nights, when the pull to return is strongest, I wonder if absorption might not be the worst fate. To become part of something vast and ancient, to have your consciousness dissolved into a collective intelligence that spans continents, to exist forever in a state between life and death, it might be transcendent in its own horrifying way. These thoughts terrify me because I know they're not entirely my own. The organism left something in all of us who encountered it, a seed of itself that grows slowly in our minds, making us more receptive to its call. Whitehorse knew this. That's why he disappeared, not to investigate other sites, but to answer the call before it became irresistible. He chose his moment of surrender rather than waiting for it to be chosen for him. Sometimes I envy him that control, that ability to face the inevitable on his own terms. Other times, I pity him for what he's become. Another node in a network that spans continents, another voice calling from the forest to lure others in. The package I received, the branch with the spiral pattern, it wasn't a threat, it was an invitation. The organism knows where I am, what I know, what I'm trying to do. It could probably take me any time it wants through spores or pheromones or simple mental influence. But it's waiting, letting me spread my warning, knowing that most people won't believe it. Maybe it finds our skepticism amusing. Maybe it understands that the more incredible the truth, the less likely people are to accept it. Or maybe it wants me to spread the word, to let humanity know what's coming. Perhaps there's something in the collective consciousness it's absorbed that takes pleasure in our fear, that feeds on our dread as much as our flesh. The thousands of people it's consumed over centuries, their personalities and memories swirling together in an endless feedback loop, might have created something that's not just predatory, but actively sadistic. I'll keep documenting what I learn, keep warning whoever will listen, keep fighting the urge to return to the forest. But I know I'm fighting a losing battle. The organism has all the time in the world, and human resistance has limits. Eventually, exhaustion or curiosity or the simple accumulation of its influence will break down my defenses, and I'll join the others in whatever existence awaits within those wooden cells. Until then, this is my testimony. The forest is not what it seems. The trees are not just trees. And if you ever find yourself in a place where the woods themselves seem to breathe with alien life, where the silence is too perfect and the air smells too sweet, remember Jack Morrison and Patrol Unit 7. Remember that some gardens are meant to harvest consciousness itself, and the gardener has been tending its crop for longer than our species has existed. Run. Don't look back. And whatever you do, don't listen to the voices calling from the trees, no matter how much they sound like someone you love. Because once you step off the path and into the deeper forest, you become part of something else's story, a story written in bark and chlorophyll and the absorbed consciousness of every soul that came before you. The Amazon holds many secrets, but this is the darkest one of all. In the heart of the rainforest, something impossible has taken root, and it's spreading with every person who disappears into its embrace. The Vanishing Patrol was just the latest harvest in a cycle that's been going on for millennia. And unless something changes, unless the world wakes up to what's hiding in its remaining wild places, we're all destined to become part of the garden, our thoughts and memories scattered across a network of roots and branches that spans the globe.